All right. Can you guys hear me? Trying to check, see if this is actually, is this working? The heck? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Hello? All right. Okay, good. Did you see me, Paul, when I put her up there at the beginning? She is sitting on my lap right now. Um, it has been the coldest winter in 20 years here. So Meatball has been spending a lot of time on my lap. I've got a space heater on one side of me, a hot water bottle on the other, and a meatball on the lap because it is cold as heck. The other night it got down to -1 Celsius, which is very cold by Uruguayan standards. I've almost never seen it go below zero. All right. Well, I'm not gonna. Sorry, I was holding meatball up, but I guess it didn't start to record at that point. So um, I guess I'm not gonna bother her again. She might move. I don't know. If she does, I'll show her off. How is everybody doing tonight? How many people have we got here? 33, I think that says. Yeah. So it says 33 waiting. So sure. I think my thing is not up to date. Let me see if I can reload this. Okay, 38 watching. There we go. That's a better judge of the situation. All right. Well, thank you all for showing up. We're going to give it a few minutes just to let people start straggling in here. Please, if you can, if you're on any social media, share the fact that share the link or whatever. So that people watch this very interesting and important episode, this live stream. I wasn't totally sure I was going to do a live stream this Sunday, but then obviously the events of yesterday have given a bit of a motivation to me to do so. Obviously, there's going to be a bit of politics that is going to be discussed tonight, but it is going to be politics mostly as relating to the hobby because naturally, you all know yesterday there was an attempted assassination of Donald Trump, and some of the left-wing people of the hobbies have already made some very, very poor statements about it. So I figured we should give some attention to those people and what they have said. Let me just see, I've got all my stuff primed here. Yeah, okay. Somebody else. I think I'm missing something here. Let's see here. All right, well, let me start by pointing out that if you guys have seen some lefty in our hobby who have had a terrible take on this subject, please be sure to point them out. Oh yeah, okay. I think I've got everything that I found. It's been kind of interesting actually because a lot of the usual suspects have been clever enough, I guess, to be very, very quiet right now. Like they haven't said anything. Matt Colville hasn't run his mouth. None of the Critical Role people, as far as I know. So yeah, this is this is pretty this is pretty clear to a lot of people just how serious it is, right? And I think that I would like to hope that there are some of these people that are really like having a sober second thought about the fact that they have claimed that every Republican candidate since 2004 at least is German 1930s mustache man, and they've done this over and over, right? It wasn't Trump. Trump wasn't the first one, right? They were saying this about Bush. They were saying it about McCain. They said it about Mitt goddamn Romney, right? Who is not only the most globalist neocon known to man, like practically you imagine he was grown in a vat just to be a globalist neocon, like an ideal version of the globalist neocon. And they were claiming that he was going to put black people back in chains and things like that, right? Like the rhetoric from the left has been insane for a very, very long time, right? And now they might have realized that this was a mistake. But on the other hand, maybe they haven't, but they're just now being strategically quiet, right? Then both of those are a possibility. So John Edgar asks, forgive me a dumb question, I'm too old to keep up with some of this stuff. Is this the same Grim Jim Zub who works on the new Conan comic? I don't believe that's the same person, no. This is James, as Judd Gossick points out in a bit later, it's James Desborough of Postmortem Studios. And we're going to be talking about him later on. Lots of hellos here, very good. Yeah, I know it's hot where a lot of you guys are. I would rather be hot than cold. I came to South America from Canada for a reason. Jed Goswick says John Wick. He's usually a blowhard. He is usually a blowhard. I haven't seen anything immediately that he said something. Again, if you guys find something in real time, then tell me about it, and we'll try to look it up. Right? Judd Goswick says Gareth Skarka might take 11 years to post his response to the Trump shooting. Surly Unicorn says we came damn close to a real shit show opening up yesterday. Well, yes, without a doubt, and I think people now kind of realized also that, if it had gone the other way, if it hadn't been for the force of providence that saved the life of Donald Trump, it would have become very ugly. I think that very quickly you would be seeing huge issues, Norvik says the quiet ones are not rethinking their attitudes, they're just scared of going too far and that their corporate overlords might fire them. Yeah, some of them, not all of them have corporate overlords, but yeah, I think they're also afraid that that if they say something right now, they're still going to end up getting too much backlash, right? Remember that a lot of these people in the gaming hobby have to lead these kind of double lives, right? That in certain social media, which for a long time was Twitter, but also other stuff, Discord and Tumblr and whatever, all the leftist places, Mastodon or whatever the hell it's called. They were going on there and they would talk, a very hard far left progressive game, but when they're selling their books, they're trying to make it look like, no, this is just an exciting sci-fi RPG or whatever, and they don't want to advertise there. There are some others that do like crap where they live, right? And then they end up, making products that are overtly political, right? But there are a lot of these people that make products that all the politics are there, but they don't present it that way, right? People aren't explicitly told that Mothership is like a hard communist RPG, right? They're led to think, oh, it's a sci-fi horror RPG, right? That sounds cool. It's OSR. Oh, that sounds cool, right? And so they're going to buy it. Evil Minion says, pretty sure Wick and Destiny at the shit takes covered yesterday from non-RPG people. Yeah. Well, I saw all the stuff about Destiny, but again, not an RPG person. So, and Wick, I don't know. I didn't see that. OSRDM says playing the flavorism of the week to move their product. Yeah, some of them do that. Steel Mongoose, everybody involved in Mothership is a hardcore Marxist. Yeah, it's part of the woke OSR. Doc Flamingo says, I tried to give the Antonio Gramsci / Ringo Starr hybrid that is Grim Jim. That's a great description of him. The benefit of the doubt, but after that video. Steambub says, I really hate the mislabeling of the OSR. Yeah, well. I mean, technically, Mothership is an OSR game in its mechanics, right? But it's heavily political. So has anyone noticed anything particularly weird today? I think today has been massively weird for me anyways. It's like all kinds of strange things going wrong, little things, like there's some kind of massive karma dump going on at a kind of universal level, to make up, I think, for the incredible act of divine intervention that spared the life of Trump. All right, so we're at 84 people now. That's nice. Very good. Well done, everyone. I'm not just going to talk about this, but I am going to talk about this, but I'm also going to chat a bit about my campaigns. And of course, as always, in my live streams, you guys can ask me questions and I will try to answer them if they're, usually questions related to RPGs, but I guess here we might be just a slight bit more open in case of it being kind of political questions. And I'll try my best to answer them. Unlike a lot of YouTubers who do live streams, I am not only going to read super chats, but if you give me a super chat, which I would really appreciate, because when I go live, I'm not monetizing the live stream, right? So super chats are very welcome, and if you do a super chat, then obviously I will read your comment. Whereas if you don't do a super chat, I will read comments that I think are interesting and worth reading out and responding to, right? Chase Lebenuk says, what are your top 3 books for researching Polish history and mythology for Baptism of Fire? Well, actually, I when I was doing the research for Baptism of Fire, now, mind you, I'd read books on European history before. I read books about the early Middle Ages, obviously, which included stuff about the Piasts and things like that. And I'd read all kinds of books of folk tales and things like that, which included some of the creatures of Polish mythology. And I'd read a lot of articles that were about early Slavic paganism, of which, there's very, very, very little information. Slavic paganism is a much bigger mystery than, say, Viking paganism, for example. And that's not, Viking paganism and Celt paganism, there's a lot of gaps. But in comparison, they look rock solid next to Slavic paganism, right, which is just filled with gaps. But when I was actually researching Baptism of Fire, I was not really looking at a lot. I wasn't looking at books. I did look at certain articles online and things like that. But you see, when was this? 25 years ago, I think 25, 26 years ago. I was one of the first people ever to have done a course, to have gone through a course. I was studying to be a historian, right? And I'd done a course that I will admit I took it because I thought it would be easy credits and would not really be important, but what the hell, that was all about doing research, academic research on the internet, how to manage it. And ironically, that was probably the one course I took in university that was the most important of any course I ever took, because it was the one that I later on used the most in all of my further careers, in almost everything I've done ever since then. Okay. And so, I learned how to research academically online, which also applies, a lot of the stuff I learned there applies to doing general research online, because people think, well, it's not hard to research online. It actually is pretty hard, because you have to know where to find things, and you also have to know how to find things, and you have to know how to differentiate between the stuff that is useful and the stuff that isn't, right? So I was using my skills as an historian, and on the internet today, there is just so many more resources. Like, to get books, if I was to go and if I were to go to an academic library, and actually, the best university in Uruguay is only ranked, I think in the low the far thousands of quality, right? So there's not, and most of the books are going to be in Spanish, right? So I couldn't really make use of library systems or anything like that, right? So my research was mainly online. I looked up in academic journals, but I also looked up in many web pages, right? And you part of the skill set that I learned academically is how to differentiate between material that is credible and material that isn't, right? And also how to confirm that by looking at multiple sources and things like that. So it's very hard for me to suggest which books I used, because I didn't really use any books at the time. I had read books before, that was part of the base of my knowledge, but mostly what I did was researching online articles and online web pages, So I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer than that. Atomic Elf asks, favorite text-based RPG? I don't really play any text-based RPGs. The only RPGs on computer that I really played a lot was NetHack and some of the other roguelikes. But nowadays I don't have time even to do that. Steambub says, thoughts on using Baptism of Fire for the Great Pendragon campaign? Well, I think it would be a very good fit, actually. You have to adapt it back to the English side of things, which means maybe using a little bit of the stuff in Lion and Dragon or Dark Albion. But I think it would actually fit very well to the Dark Ages element of the Great Pendragon campaign, Matthew Sinan says, but wait, isn't Super Chat a monetization of a video? No, Super Chat is an automatic thing that you can do in a live stream. But aside from that, you could also monetize the live stream, which apparently means that people will get random commercial breaks or things like that, or ads underneath the video or something. And I once did that by accident, and I'm sorry about that because people were pissed off. So as when the video is running, it's not monetized, right? And so the money comes from Super Chats. All right, so we've got some Super Chats. Let's jump to those because people have been putting them in there. The Pronto, $20. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And the Pronto says, tuna for Meatball. That's right. Your Super Chats help contribute to Meatball's Tuna Fund. I had some people the last time I said that get very worried because they're like, oh, that tuna can be bad for cats, for their liver and things like that. I want to clarify, I do not give Meatball whole cans of tuna to eat, okay? I give her, when I'm cooking with tuna, I give her a little bit of tuna and some of the juices of the tuna, in the can and stuff like that. And she goes nuts for it, right? But no, I make sure not to give her too much and not to give it too often because I was kind of aware of that, Let me see. Chase Lebengoth Senpai noticed me. All right, Jeff Ramdekar, $5 Canadian. Thank you very much. Finally, putting my modern apocalypse system to paper and looking at an OSR system for it. Double D and Ryan Davis recommend Wretched. Thoughts? Well, I mean, it kind of will depend on what you want it to do, right? Like, the Wretched RPG is a very kind of the system itself is a very traditional OSR game, right? It's got pretty much the standard OSR rules. There's very little variation there. There's not a lot of stuff that goes really wild, apart from, you know, their vice and virtue sort of thing, right? That they have in there, which was an inspiration for the vice and virtue optional rules in Baptism of Fire. But I think, you know, that certainly Wretched is one of the things about it, because it's very generic, is it's set up that you can apply it to a number of different settings, and they have to a lot of settings, right? So you might want to consider that, but it kind of depends. I mean, you might want to start with that as a base, and then you might want to expand it to give options if you have specific like subsystems of things you want to do, right? You might want to build on that from the basis of kind of the Wretched rules. I think that's not a bad idea, actually. So, you know, the key is that the core of your game be generic OSR, and then on that, what you want to do is make the changes that will fit for you. I mean, you can become more experimental. My games are a bit more experimental because I do stuff like I have the table for advancement instead of having structured advancement bonuses every level. And, you know, if you like stuff like that, you can incorporate that kind of thing, right? Yeah, I mean, it can kind of help if you make a point of it being Wretched compatible. I mean, that taps you into the fan base for the Wretched games. You know, I don't know if does Wretched already have a post-apocalyptic game? It would seem to me like they would, right? Because usually their games are all, you know, kind of dark and gloomy, right? So that would seem like a natural fit. But if they don't have an apocalyptic game, then that's an especially good idea. If they do have one, then you might need to look at the compatibility between that one and the one that you're imagining, right? North of the Rockies, $10. Thank you so much. He says, you're right about the comparative rock solidness of Norse mythology, since we have primary source texts that are always in print and widely available. Yes. Now, some of those primary sources are post-Christian, right? That is to say, they are Christian era texts talking about paganism. Some of them are older, but may have had changes in the post-Christian era as well, right? There are a lot of debates about that. Like, you know, like, for example, the Norse god Balder, in many of the ways he's presented, has a lot of Christ-like elements to him. And there is a question as to whether that was original, like if it was just like that, because I mean, again, you know, the Christ figure is a type of archetype, right? So like, you know, Krishna has certain things similar to Christ, Dionysus has certain things similar to Christ, and Balder might have certain things similar to Christ, right? But there's also a possibility that was exaggerated in the post-Christian era. So there are still tricky parts about understanding Norse mythology. One of the things that you have to get is that obviously all of these have now been, what we now have are a much more simplistic view, because like Norse mythology existed from the time of the Romans, right? From like Julius Caesar when he was talking about Wotan and Donar, you know, that's Odin and Thor, right? So from the 4th century all the way to like the 12th century, right? And in that time, they also existed in vastly different regions. There was like the German version of it, there was the Danish version of it, there was the Scandinavian version of it. And they weren't going to be the same in every place, right? It's like if you look at, for example, you look at Hinduism today, we want to think, oh, well, Hinduism, it's a religion, it's one religion, right? But actually, the way Hinduism is practiced in like the north or the south are very, very different. If you go further north to the Himalayas, different again, right? And if you go further to the west or further to the east, it's different again, right? So there are huge regional variations, and they're like to the point of like major differences of emphasis of certain gods over others, gods having slightly different characteristics than the same god in another place, right? So there's a lot of stuff that is still missing about Norse mythology. For example, compared to Greek and Roman mythology, and even there's stuff missing, right? It's very hard to recover all of this sort of thing. But yes, the difference is the Norse did leave more records. The Slavic paganism, we have very, very little records about. So a large part of what I put into Baptism of Fire was an attempt using all the best information I could gather, but there was a lot of stuff that I had to make judgment calls about how they fill in the blanks, right? Sad Wings Raging, $10 super chat. Thank you so much. Sardine Fund for Meatball. Thank you very much. Steel Mongus goes, how else is she going to get her creatine? Yeah, but it's true actually, because it's such a rich tuna, so rich as a fish that it so fatty and everything that if cats eat too much of it, it's not healthy for them at all. Midnight Green says Grim Jim has terminal Trump derangement syndrome. Yeah. Jeff Ramdekar says, I grabbed the rules, but I'm wondering, I guess you're talking about the Wretched rules here, if they have an SRD document. I don't think so. I think the Wretched RPG second edition is made basically their generic version of the rules. And then you can like adjust to necessity. Steambub says, he reviewed the post-apocalyptic game. I'm sure I did, but you got to understand, Steambub. They've made like 200 games, right? In like 2 years. They made 100 games, and then they made the second edition of 100 games. And they sent me all these games, so you can't expect me to remember how many of the Wretched games I've reviewed. I'm sure I did, and I'm sure it was good, now that you've said it, right? Like, okay, so there is an apocalyptic game for the Wretched universe, but, you know, it's hard to remember all of them. They're like... I thought I put out a lot of content, and these maniacs put out like more content than I do. They're nuts, right? But it's amazing how much they put out. Judd Gossick says there's Wretched Apocalypse, and upcoming is Wretched Armageddon Part 2. Okay. Jestro Games says, I played a weekly Cyberpunk Red game, and I got into an argument about buying skills and advancement. D&D really ruined those guys' ability to understand gaining XP by doing things. Shark says, yeah, Pundit, each Hindu faction having hundreds of millions of worshippers, each with centuries of tradition. Yeah. Well, and the same thing happened with, you know, in the pagan world in Europe, you know, there was huge varieties. And I mean, the Greeks had huge varieties, right? So like, you know, we have, for example, in Greek mythology, you have Ares, right? And Ares, you know, to the Romans, Mars, the equivalent to Ares, was this badass god. He was like, you know, noble and powerful, and you know, he was one of the major gods of the Romans, and he had a very good reputation, right? The Greeks, if you look at most of the Greek mythology we've inherited, Ares comes off basically as a bully and as not very smart, and sometimes a kind of a coward in certain ways, not so much in fighting, but in other respects, you know. And he's kind of a buffoon, you know. He's like the regimental of the of the Greek god version of Archie comics or whatever, right? And that is very much a perspective of the fact that a lot of the material that we have comes from an Athenian context, right? Because Athena was also the goddess of war, right? And so it was a rival to Ares. So obviously, in a place where Athena was given a high level of importance, Ares had to be diminished somehow as being a lesser version, right? But there were other places in Greek and in other times, in Greece and in other times, where Ares had a very different point of view, where he didn't seem at all like the kind of buffoonish figure that we tend to see him as today in Greek mythology, right? North of the Rocky says, Ares and Athena represent the polar opposites of the nature of war. Yes, in the Athenian version of it. Yes, that's right. Sad Rings Raging says, there's also Nike, the goddess of victory. That's right. Dark Wielder says, how different rules-wise can an OSR product be before it's not OSR? Well, that would be because you need to have the fundamental structure of the D&D system, right? So I think for it to be OSR, it needs to have the 6 ability scores. It needs to have hit points. It needs to have armor class. It needs to have a D20 based combat system. It needs to have some form of saving throws that should probably also be D20 based. But there are multiple options there, right? You can have a single saving throw number like an old D&D, which is what I did in my games. You can have the classic basic expert saving throws, right? Rod, staff wand, poison, dragon breath, magic and paralysis, right? Or you could even import the reflex, fortitude, willpower from 3rd edition, because all of those have kind of been normalized in the OSR, right? You need to have a level system, and technically you probably need to have some kind of a class system, but you could, for example, in the Invisible College, what I have is essentially a kind of a class system that really isn't, because you can flip from one class to the other every time you level up, right? So I guess it's a kind of multi-class system, you could say. But essentially, it's much more classless than a typical OSR game, right? But those fundamental, those most basic elements have to be in there in some form. And beyond that, you can become very experimental, right? Just the more experimental you get, keep in mind, the point is what you have to have has to be able to be relatively easily converted into the other OSR games, or that stuff from other OSR games can be relatively easily converted into your game for the purpose of play. Because that is the central benefit of the OSR. You can have 100 different OSR books that are made by dozens of different people, and you can mix and match them while you're playing in the campaign, right? You can take monsters from one book and use them in another, so that's important. Jester says, Pundit, why does the Silk Road span from Acre to Lanzhou and not Byzantium to Shanghai? Well, first off, because in this time period, there was already a chaotic situation in China. And honestly, the Silk Road is the Western European view of the Silk Road was not from Byzantium. Byzantium was a different thing. Like, it was important, right? But it wasn't the standard Silk Road route. The standard Silk Road route was from the Holy Land, from the Levant, right? From Tyre and Acre to China, right? But China, for them, remember, we get the word Kathai from the Kitai, who were not actually China at all. They were like from the territory of what is, today where the Uyghurs are and stuff like that, right? But we thought that was, the Westerners thought that was China, that was where they were, that was already China. Now, of course, it was a Chinese culture, but so, for me, China itself as a setting would be a different product, right? And I might at some point make one about the Southern Song Dynasty, a source book for Sword and Caravan. And likewise, Byzantium is its own thing. They're both too big to fit into that. The road is the stuff in between those, right? So it would have been too much material. It would have to have been like, I don't know, a 900-page book. Shark says there are also a lot of religious parallels between North Baltic and Slavic religions, also Hindu. The Indo-European connections are strong. Yes, that's true. It's a good moment for me to give a little bit of an advertising to the current issue of the Pundit Files. If you go to the Red Room store, which is the only place you can get the Pundit Files, the current issue is the Pundit Files number 16, the Slavic World Tree. This is the second supplement I've put out in the Pundit Files for Baptism of Fire, and it presents a complete guide to the Slavic planar cosmology, detailing the various realms of the fairies, the underworlds of the dead, the realms of the gods, and many of the secrets of reaching and traversing these planes and confronting its guardians, secrets, and treasures. So this is my version, because again, we don't have a complete cosmology like we do of Yggdrasil, but we know that the Slavs had a world tree, which was no doubt similar in some respects to that of Yggdrasil. And we know some of the worlds that they envisioned on it. And we know about the white stone, which I already talked about in Baptism of Fire, being at the base of the world tree. So in this product, I detail the perspectives of the Slavic world tree, what it would mean to Christians, because it was certainly Christianized in the early period of conversion. And there's even a very famous folk story about Adalbert of Prague, and who was Saint Wojtek in Polish, and one of the great, is considered like the big saint of this period for Polish people, and how he had gone there. So yeah, it was actually a very interesting product, and I'm sure if you're interested in having your Baptism of Fire campaign do some planar adventuring, you should really check it out. It's at the Red Room, and it can be yours if you can get someone to give you tree fitty, okay? Especially in this case, tree fitty. But all of the Pundit Files are only tree fitty. So there we go. All right, so we are at how many people now? 93. I guess we could get started on the topic now. You see here. Steam Bub says one of these days I want to make a Wuja Juan Juan OSR game. Steam Bub says I want to make a Sengoku Japan OSR. Well, yeah, go for it, guys. I mean, come on. You know that the OSR is bigger than it ever has been. It's been growing steadily over the last 5 years, and this is a great time to do more OSR games. All right. So there have been a few people already. As I was pointing out at the beginning of this live stream, I think there have been a lot of people who've been keeping kind of quiet about all this. They've been a little bit, I think, reluctant to spread their views at the moment that, in the first 24 hours after someone tried to murder Donald Trump. But there have been people. So I'm going to start. Somebody sent me, because remember I asked people to share their if they'd seen anyone giving like some really crappy takes on the from the hobby on the attack on Trump. And so there's, and again, I don't want any of these people to be harassed. Definitely don't think you should go and harass people, but I thought I should bring it to your attention, specifically so that you don't, so you don't patronize these people either, right? Unknowingly. So there's a channel called Gamers on Games, which is apparently a very unsuccessful gaming channel. It's unsuccessful because this guy has 4,000 views, 4,000 subscribers, I mean. Gamers on Games is a guy who started a channel that was about RPGs, and he still occasionally talks about RPGs, but he has instead, for quite some time now, jumped the shark into talking in the same channel about politics. Like if I were to do, sometimes I talk about politics on a live stream like I'm doing right now. right? But if I were to do a channel where I was just talking about my political views, I wouldn't want to do it on the same one as I do gaming, because I know that I mean, I'm sure that a lot of you guys have similar views to my own on politics, and that's part of what's attracted you to me and to my channel. But when I do talk about it here, I always talk about it in the context of gaming, right? I wouldn't be doing like a video about like just, I don't know, something that happened in Congress that has nothing to do with gaming, right? But this guy's just mixed it all up, and he's it's very, very clear Trump derangement, but it's also very clear that this guy's a massive leftist. And the thing is, for a guy with 4,000 subscribers, his views are pathetic. Most of his videos get under two, like they get 2-digit views, right? They get under 100 views. So this is not a successful person to begin with, which makes sense when you realize what this guy is like, right? His most successful, and it's not like, you know, like his videos mostly don't, his political videos mostly don't do well either, right? Like, you know, they also get, you know, a lot of them get under 50 views, right? His most successful recent kind of RPG related video is one from 2 weeks ago that got 203 views. Wow. I think I've got more than 203 views in this live stream at this point. And it's called How to Play a Queer Character in D&D. So this gives you some idea of what this guy is all about. And he immediately came out and did a series of YouTube shorts. There's 4 of them now, I believe. When I last checked, there were only 3, so I guess he's added another one. Where he first kind of, in the first one, he kind of suggests that the whole thing was staged, which is, I've heard other people on the left saying this too, right? And it's just so absolutely absurd, right? Like, could you imagine claiming that this is staged? You have a guy, you tell him to go up there, you somehow arrange it so that the, you know, he doesn't get stopped by the police, right, or by the Secret Service, and then you tell him, yeah, this is what you're gonna do, right? You're gonna shoot like really, really close to me. You're gonna just clip my ear, right? This is one of many things that I've heard leftists saying that shows you how little they understand about guns in general, you know. And I'm not an expert on guns by any mean, right? I've never actually even owned a gun. I have sometimes shot a gun, but not very often. But you know, there's a whole world of difference, just because, you know, if you're someone who's rabidly anti-gun, like most progressives are, you tend to know nothing at all about them, right? So one of the things we heard very often at the beginning on when this first happened yesterday on Twitter, there's a bunch of people going, no, this is fake. It was a BB gun or something, because you could hear it, right? It doesn't sound like a gun, right? And the people who are saying this because the only time they've heard the sound of guns is on TV or movies, right? And which does not sound like what a gun firing in real life sounds like. Okay, so they're thinking, oh, that's obviously not a gun. That's some kind of a BB gun or something, you know. And so like the idea, and second, the idea, because you could have like really, really good marksmen, right? Really great marksmen. And even then, if you told a really great marksman, yeah, okay, all I want you to do is shoot me so close that it like nicks my ear but doesn't kill me, the guy would be saying, you're out of your mind, right? Like, do not do this, right? This is extremely dangerous, especially, you know, even if you're at a distance, it was, I think, 125 meters. That's a pretty easy shot, by the way, which tells us also that the shooter wasn't very good. But at that distance with the rifle, I mean, but you would never do that, right? You'd never tell someone, yeah, we're gonna fake this, so you know, it's like you're trying to kill. And then you know, obviously that bullet's also going to hit something, you know, and apparently I don't know. I don't think that the bullet that nicked Trump's ear actually ended up hitting someone behind him, thankfully. Although, as we know, there was a person who did die as a result of one of the other shots. Really, really horrific. but yeah, the idea to claim that this is staged is just so stupid, right? It's pretty ridiculous. It's very ridiculous, actually. So that was his first video. Let me just see what you guys are saying on the comments here. Tabletop Tap Room says, Gamers on Games is Dave Nighthawk Simpson, and he is a loony and paid for subs. I wouldn't be surprised he did, because, you know, with that low number of views, it means either he's really done something terrible to his channel, or he is paying for bots, you know. Sadwings Raging says, I love how the tolerant left is big mad the dude missed. Yeah, well, there have been some people, you know, not people in the gaming area, but there have been some people that have gotten into quite a lot of notoriety for saying that. You know, it's you know, this is obviously the worst possible result for the left, right? Because now, if Trump had died, it would have been terrible for them too, right? Because there would have been, you know, shit would have gone off, right? It would have the whole scenario would have been nightmarish, right? And I think some people kind of like got a wake up call about this, that they're like, hang on, right? Because if this had gone the other way, you know, we'd be looking at like a Sarajevo type situation here or something, you know. It would not be good. So I think some of them are kind of now realizing that was not a great thing if to have happened at all, right? But you know, like, if the attack had happened, probably the best thing would have been if somehow Trump looked weak as a result of that, right? Like, he was shot at, he cowers, people grab him, they take him away, and then, you know, you don't know what's going on. He runs for it, right, or something like that, right? None of that happened. Instead, you know, he comes off looking as the most freaking heroic figure in presidential history since at least Teddy Roosevelt, right? He stands there in the middle. He raises the fist, right with the American flag above him. It's a shot that's going to be like iconic forever. And, you know, it's just doomed him, right? Like, everybody who opposes Trump is doomed now, right? This is like insane, right? And I've been saying on Twitter that the upraised fist, right, which has been used so often by the left, this is the moment to capture it and invert it, right, and make it a right-wing symbol, right? The upraised fist with the American flag flying overhead, right? This is the moment. So, like, this is the worst thing that could have happened, because Trump didn't, you know, he didn't wet himself, he didn't run away, he wasn't crying, he stood up there, he said, fight, right? And like, that isn't something that you can, you know, in most situations, people just can't possibly react like that, right? You could have guys that are really brave and tough and principled, and then, you know, as if you are being shot at, instinct takes over, and you try to get out of there first, right? You might then try to do tough talk later, right? But that level of wherewithal, because he didn't just do it, like, it wasn't just an instinct of his, right? They were moving. I said, wait, right? And then he did this, and he said, fight, right? And so, like, it showed like the level of clarity of thinking that he had, that even like seconds after he was shot, and he was injured, he was bleeding, and he still stops and says, no, I have to say something here, I have to do something, I have to make sure everyone knows that this isn't stopping me, right? And he did that. And that is, there are very few people who would be able to do that in that scenario. I don't know if I could, and probably most of you can't know if you would, right? Because it for most people, that takes a lot of training to do, right? For, like, yeah, there are guys, special forces people train for ages to be able to go against all of their survival instincts to do something important, right? And Trump has never been in the army, so it's not from that. It's just that he is such a gangster that he was, you know, he's not going to bow to any of this, you know. So it's really remarkable. Guys Guy that hates bulls says you look like you're about to do an audiobook recording of a Clockwork Orange. All right, I guess I'll take that. Marcus Aurelius says to try to hit such a shot just nicking the ear is impossible. Yeah, it is impossible. It's absolutely impossible. Ryan says, dude, it's July. What's with this carve in the ogre? Ryan, I'm in the southern hemisphere. It's the middle of winter here. It's actually the coldest winter in 20 years here. I should be like wrapped in a blanket or something. You know? Chris Mouse says, how can they claim it's fake when 2 people were injured and another one died? Yeah, well, I guess, you know, in their minds, they might think, well, you know, it was the bullets weren't fake, but it was fake that it was meant to hit him, right, or something like that, because they can imagine in their heads, in their version, they're like, you know, they're so twisted, their perspective of the world and of reality that they, you know, these people think that Trump doesn't care about the American people, right? And like, because you hear that all the time, right? Oh, he doesn't care about these people. He just cares about himself, right? And no, it's not true. I mean, obviously, yes, Trump does care about himself, and Trump is quite how do you call it? He's quite conceited about himself. There's no question about that, right? But it is also brutally obvious that Trump cares a lot about America, the country, and the American people, right? And and the idea that he would just like, yeah, he wouldn't care if somebody if he had made someone shoot into his crowd. No, that's just ridiculous. But it's not ridiculous from their sick minds, right? Where are we here? John Fraser says they also think 130 yards is a far range for rifle. Yeah, it's not a far range for a rifle. That's one of the things RPGs get wrong a lot, and part of it is, I guess, for like gameability purposes. Even, you know, some of my RPGs do that too, right? Like even the ranges that I use in that I have in the Gonzo Fantasy Companion or in World of the Last Sun or in the Invisible College, I know that they're very short of what it should actually be. But yeah, so like, you know, a 308 rifle has an effective range of up to 874 yards, right? So like that's way more than in a typical RPG, right? Jester Game says, can you play psychic detectives in an Invisible College? Well, you could. I mean, the Invisible College campaign is set up to be about like you're playing a member of a secret order that part of what they do is kind of as investigation of weird things. Part of what they do is fighting in this secret occult war against much more sinister occult groups and things like that. But you could take all that away. You could use the core classes of, you know, ceremonial magician, chaos magician, and skill and combat guy, and use that to make a campaign of psychic detectives. You could very easily do that. You just have to skip out on a lot of the setting stuff. Chris Miller, $5 super chat. Thank you very much, Chris. I really appreciate that. CNN, elderly candidate falls during campaign rally. Yeah, this is another ridiculous thing that I'm sure all of you have seen now. In fact, CNN's first headline was Trump. What was it? I'm trying to remember exactly what the term was, but it was something like Trump leaves rally early after noises or something like that, right? It was like the most absurd thing. And CNN, the Washington Post, a whole bunch of the mainstream media tried these headlines where they said anything other than that it was actually a shooting and that Trump was injured, right? They didn't want to say that, right? And it's so stupid because they know that eventually they're going to have to say it, right? They've covered up a lot of shit, but there's no way they're going to cover this up, right? Trump was shot at and 2 people died, right? So like, there's no way this was going to go hidden, right? But they were some idiot, some ultra leftist idiot was trying to find a way to describe this. And one thing I've seen is certain funny memes. I think these are from the Babylon Bee of like what it would be, what CNN's headlines would have been in historical moments, right? So like Abraham Lincoln seemingly nods off at theater, you know, at the assassination of Lincoln, or Julius Caesar injured in group hug at the Senate. You know, like that's pretty much the same sort of thing as what they're actually trying to pull up here. And like that means, like I've been saying, the mainstream media, the establishment media, are the privatized propaganda ministry of the leftist elite, right? And they are in every way like trying to claim that the America is better than the Soviet Union was, right? Never mind Putin's Russia. You know, it's ridiculous because these guys do things that Pravda, right, that the official state propaganda newspaper of the Soviet Union would never have gone so far as to try. They would never have dared to do something this obvious, right? Because it's just so impossible, right? So ridiculous. There were you know, and Pravda was full of ridiculous stuff, but never anything as stupid as stuff that nowadays the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, and MSNBC do every single day. Right? The way that they lie to you in such a blatant way and then expect you to believe it either because you're a true believer or because they think you're an idiot. You know, it's crazy. It's just crazy. Steve Up says the right has the perfect icon to steal the power fist from the left. Yes, we must do that. I'm so in favor of this. My name says that photo of him with his fist up is going to be everywhere. Pretty ballsy. Like, yeah, I mean, I thought the Trump mugshot was going to be the defining picture of this campaign of this year. And this is 1,000 times bigger than that, right? Like that picture of Trump with the fist, the one with the American flag behind him, surrounded by the Secret Service agents, and him just, you know, bloody and totally defiant. That is the picture that's going to go down in history for Trump. That's going to be the thing that means that no one is ever going to forget him. Doc Flamingo, $5, second best. Andrew Jackson was on his balcony, went inside, got a gun, came back, and returned fire. Yeah, that's true. Andrew Jackson was also a badass, and he has something in common with Trump, right? Like he was a populist candidate. He got cheated out of an election, and then he came back and he kicked ass. You know. Ironcaster says Trump is also a solid foot tall. Yeah, that's true. Trump is a tall man, right? And it's hard to tell sometimes. You know, an enormous number of actors are very small people that have to be artificially made to look taller, right? But then Trump is very tall, right? Apparently not as tall as Barron now, who was there and who will not forgive when his time comes. You know, Barron is the chosen one. Off-grid Grognard says the tree must be watered, say the fathers. That's right. Calvin Malone says, Kevin Malone, sorry, says Trump should sue the people claiming it was fake for $1.3 trillion, give them the Alex Jones treatment. Exactly. I mean, that's another thing. Everything they have done to you, you have to do to them, right? You have to turn it back on them. You know, one of the Alinsky rules is always force your enemy to play by their own rules. You know, and everything that they are doing, you have to go and do back to them, right? The idea that, oh no, we're above that. No, that's not what's going to work here. What works here, the only end game that works here is when there has been a complete purge in government and society of the influence of this kind of extreme left communism, right? So like that's it has to be, you have to be serious about it. You can't say, well, we're just going to be, you know, we're going to morally win while they destroy everything. No, that doesn't work, you know. Nobody cares about your moral victory, dude. They care about what they're doing to their kids. They care about what they're doing to the country. They care about what they're doing to the border. You know, if you don't fix those things, moral victories are worth zero, absolutely zero. W. Grell says, I've been reading Bernard Cromwell's Saxon stories, Last Kingdom. Any chance you can make a medieval authentic? I quite like The Last Kingdom. 9th and 10th century Anglo-Saxon England in the future. Well, possibly. I do try varying from time periods, you know, so maybe, you never know, it might happen. I think a more possible thing that might happen at some point is that I will be doing a source book for Baptism of Fire that will be about Vikings, and it'll be set in Jomsburg. So because that's in Poland, right? Like that's in the Vikings had said the remaining pagan Vikings at the time of Baptism of Fire had settled along the Pomeranian coastland, right? The lands of the Pomeranians who were also still pagans, you know. So there's definitely material there for having a Viking adventuring supplement. Shark says Elon Musk fully endorsed Trump. Yeah, that's right. Bob Vecna says they're angling for the Baghdad Bob Award for excellence in journalism. Yeah, well, you know, even Baghdad Bob only went so far, right? Like, I think CNN outstripped them, at least certainly as of yesterday. They have outstripped them completely. And, you know, Bob Vecna says he'll raise another 100 million by the end of Business Monday. Yeah. Well, look, Donald Trump, with that photo that was taken, that photo by itself is worth 300 million in advertising, right? Like he could have spent $300 million in ads and it would not have the same effect that that one photo has, right? Because you've got a ton of people. Let me tell you something. One of the greatest analysts of American politics, who's also one of the most successful American politicians, you guys aren't going to like the name I'm about to say, but you can't deny his political savvy. Bill Clinton once famously said that above everything else, the American people admire a politician who is strong. He went on to say that the American people will vote for someone who is strong but wrong over someone who is weak but right. And in that, he was like criticizing the previous Democrats of the, you know, basically from McGovern onwards until Bill Clinton, who had all kind of screwed the pooch, right? Because they were righteous but weak, right? And so you can interpret that strong but wrong and weak but right to include meaning that you don't necessarily agree with everything that Trump believes in, or that, you know, that the strong candidate believes in, but you like his strength more than the other guy's weakness. So you won't vote for that other guy, right? This is a real truth of the American culture and of the American political system, right? And now we have two images. One is of Trump having just been shot, blood on his face, fist in the air, American flag, right? Standing there proudly in the middle of potential danger to act, to make a show of defiance and of his wherewithal, right? The other is Biden stumbling as he's trying to go upstairs, right? Like that's the two images of this election. And there's no coming back from that, right? There's no way that can be fixed at this point, right? It's monumental. Chris Miller, another $5. Thank you so much. He says it took exactly 2 days for the MSM to push voters to get rid of the Second Amendment. There are people, you know, they're always, every time there's a shooting, the left tries to advocate for that. You'll notice that nobody on the right is advocating for that. You know, some idiot once said, well, oh, where was, actually, it was this idiot. I'm sorry, my mistake. Let's get back to our current idiot, Gamers on Games. He said in one of his other shorts, something along the lines of, oh, where was the good guy with the gun? You know, all of these Trump fans, they're you know, he's got the smuggest fucking look on his face when he's He's like, where were the good guys with the gun? There's always all these Republicans say you need a good guy with a gun to beat a bad guy with a gun. Where was he? It was the Secret Service guy that shot the guy. That was the good guy with the gun in this case. That's. I mean, like, what point are you trying to make there, right? For starters, because there's a Secret Service involvement, I'm pretty sure you can't go into the Trump rally with a gun if you're just somebody coming to attend it. That's for obvious reasons. It's a security question. But like, nobody in the right is saying, "Oh, let's get rid of the Second Amendment." Like, that is not the issue. They're saying Joe Biden and the Democrats and the mainstream media are responsible for what happened, because for years now they have been claiming that Trump is an existential threat to America. And in fact, now there's this great problem that the Democrats have, because they have had to, even Biden eventually, I mean, it took him forever, but had to make a comment about, this is terrible what happened, right? So hang on, Biden repeatedly said that Trump wants to end democracy, that he's the greatest threat to democracy. He said 5 days ago that they need to put him in the crosshairs, right? So if you're saying now that this was a terrible event that happened, that it was a terrible tragedy, were you just lying when you were saying that he was an existential threat to democracy? Because you can't have both, right? That those aren't mutually compatible, right? So this is where the left has got a much bigger problem than anything else. Certainly much bigger than their desire to disarm the population. Is that all of them have been calling for this constantly for years, and now they have to pretend that, at least the ones that are in political power, places of important office, have to pretend that they didn't want this to happen, right? Because they know that the American people are going to have a huge backlash, especially after how it turned out and how Trump comes out looking, right? Again, if he'd come out looking like a coward or a weakling, it would have been different, but he didn't. He came out looking like a goddamn hero, right? Like, just an icon, right? Like, it's unbelievable how that turned out. David says they drew first blood. Sadwings Raging says Sulla, the American Sulla, Trump too. Steambob says the memes of Baron Trump and the novel Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. Meme magic is real. Yeah. Well, I tell you, meme magic is real. I mean, it is. It's a variety of chaos magic, and it really does happen. Sorry, says we need to go as extreme in our way, otherwise the Hegelian dialectic will only work in their direction, with the worldview being the baseline. Well, I'm not a great believer in the Hegelian dialectic, but you are right. Yeah, I mean, like, we see this in Europe, where just recently conservative parties won all across the board in the European elections, and the message there was far-right parties win the European elections. But if the majority of people voted for it, that's not far-right. That's the center. That's the center, right? The other parties are far left, but they choose to define that in a totally different way. To them, communism is the center. Everything else is far right. Like, that's the perspective. Or, centrist would be someone who just is a socialist that dreams of eventually achieving communism. Like, that's the perspective there. All right. Getting rid of some trolling here. It's really weird how you get, like, guys that show, like, and I mean, it's one thing if there's people on the chat that show up and try to attack me or something like that, right? Like, pundit haters. But then you get, like, these people just randomly show up on a chat and start saying nonsense for no reason at all. Like, it's just so weird. And this didn't always happen before. Like, it didn't used to happen to me at all in my live streams. It's just something that's happened later on, It's very weird, very weird. And we don't have either of my moderators on tonight, so you'll have to forgive me for the fact that I let Jeff Cordio keep talking about his diarrhea for much too long. I was late in catching it. North of the Rockies says Trump broke Hillary's kill streak. Well, if one person could do it, it had to be Donald, right? Jestro Games says, Pundit, any advice about running a Lion and Dragon campaign during the Black Death? Well, the Black Death, the peak of the Black Death was like 1348 to 1350, right? So you're in the middle of the 100 Years' War. Very exciting time. It's a very good setting to have, right? But what I would suggest, I guess, is that you should probably start it. I mean, I don't always advocate that you should like deceive your players, but you could say, I'm going to do a Lion and Dragon campaign. I'm going to start it in 1347 or something like that, right? And you could set it either in France at the 100 Years' War, set it in England, and have, you know, the standard adventuring for a little while. Then you like hit 1348, and then you like start the apocalypse, basically, right? Where people start to hear about how in France there's, you know, a bunch of people dying from some terrible plague, right? And then like have it keep coming, and then eventually it's going to catch up to wherever the PCs are, right? And then, you know, you got to prepare the PCs to die of the plague, because some of them will, right? I mean, in theory, at least, some of them ought to, right? But then you can see like what they're doing in this world that like, because it really did, it created it. Remember that in like 2 years, it killed a third of the population, right? So it just disrupted everything in society. And it created a kind of period of anarchy there where a lot of interesting things could have happened. So I don't know. That's probably how I would run it. Steel Mongoose says Trump clearly believes in something and he will put himself on the line for that belief. Hard to think of many American politicians like that. Yeah. Chris Miller says Biden's initial statement was basically, we don't know what happened yet. Let's not jump to conclusions. We all watched it live. Yeah. Well, maybe Biden didn't know what happened because he was probably asleep at the time, right? And then they had to wake him up and he was all groggy. He probably didn't know it. To be fair to Biden, he probably didn't know what happened yet. You know, like AD0002 says, you look very distinguished and proper, sir. I commend you. Thank you very much. Well, you know, I partly in Uruguay and in the Southern Cone, you know, especially in like Argentina and Uruguay, but also Chile and Paraguay to some extent, people in the middle class tend to consistently dress well, let's say, right? Which doesn't mean that they're always very, very, very formal, right? And this, but I wouldn't consider this to be formal as such, right? But that you will rarely see someone who is, say, from a professional class going around in a t-shirt and shorts, right? Like unless maybe they're going to the beach, they might, right? But in any other context, they wouldn't. They'd be dressed in pants. They'd have shoes. They'd have a button shirt if they're an adult, right? Like I'm not talking about teenagers here, obviously, but you know, an actual shirt. And you know, obviously in winter they would dress in, you know, some kind of sweater and a jacket and a scarf or something like that. You know, not everyone has a scarf quite as colorful as this one, I'll grant you, but so you know, it's a bit of a culture thing, right? But it's also just that, you know, like I believe in actually dressing well. Right? Like I'm there's a spectrum. You have a variety of choices in your OSR YouTubing experience. At one end of the spectrum, there's me, you know, that you're usually going to see me wearing my, you know, this is not a formal jacket. This is what's called I guess a smoking jacket or a professor's jacket. You can tell because of the elbow pads. But it's semi formal. It's from the 1937 collection of Harrington's, which is a men's clothing store here. And you know, that's one end of the spectrum with the scarf and you know, and the pipe and everything. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's James Raggi, who will be like in his underwear with his pot belly showing and his hair's all messed up, you know? So those are your options. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I am saying one might be a little bit less horrific to the eyes than the other, perhaps, right? But other than that, you know, like I'm not going to criticize the guy. It's his style, and then I've got my style, you know. um, oh, I'm here, says, who is that? Is that, oh, it's Calvinani. Hey, Cal, thank you for coming aboard. Osiris says, welcome to being a 100+ view streamer. Well, I've done more than 100 before. I've had 150, sometimes somewhere between 150 and 200. I don't know if I've ever broken 200 on a live stream in my channel, but yeah, it's not always, but it's not unusual for me either. Which surprises me because, you know, usually my live streams are just me talking for a very long time. But sometimes they get better views than some episodes of inappropriate characters even, you know, so it's okay, great. I mean, I'm very happy. Thank you all for watching, you know, and thank you for your support. Thank you for the super chats that keep, you know, meatball and tuna and everything. So yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate all of you who are here, and we've still got a lot to cover because I'm still only on the first of the 3 guys I want to talk about. Diversity and Dragons says hello, tuning in while I prep for VentureCon. Is VentureCon this weekend, Diversity and Dragons? Nice to see you, by the way. Double D kind of he kind of sniped me a bit earlier because he did a live stream earlier about the same topic, but I don't know if he's covering all the same stuff I did. I didn't have a chance to watch his live stream yet because I've been very busy today, so I'm sorry about that, Double D, but I will later. Sad Wings Raging. I want Pundit to do a historical RPG on the Picts. Yeah, but there's so little information on the Picts. It's such that would be so difficult. And anyways, the Picts are kind of weird, aren't they? I mean, like, I don't know. Let me see. It was after Brandon's bedtime, says John Oxford. Osborne, sorry. Calvinoni says, well, me and the wife are going out to Mexican food and to celebrate her graduating from a nurse course. Adios, los Latinorcs. All right. OSRDM says Speedos on the beach. Yeah, well, you do see a lot of fat guys in Speedos on the beach in South America. Because, you know, they're very European. It's more European. The culture is more European than what you get in North America, right? Steambump says, funny enough, I took a nap before the assassination and woke up finding about the failure of the attack from a stream thumbnail on YouTube. Yeah, that's wild. What was going on with me? I was busy. I was not on the internet, basically. So I hadn't noticed. And then a friend of mine, not a gaming friend, not someone who is historically a political person. She's a psychologist, you know, a Jungian psychologist. And she sends me a WhatsApp. She goes, I'm guessing you saw this already, right? I'm like, wait, what? You know, I had no idea. So yeah, but I mean, that was only maybe a half hour after it happened or something. Chris Miller has to go. Thank you so much, Chris Miller. I really appreciate it. Xnard says, it's funny, Southern Hemisphere man, because I'm in my underwear at 86 degrees Fahrenheit with in 45 degrees north latitude. Yeah, well, that I know it's very hot in the northern part of the northern hemisphere right now, but this is also very, very cold here in the southern tip of the southern hemisphere. Steambump says, Gentleman's Gazette is a good YouTube channel to get a start into men's fashion. I've never looked at like fashion magazines or fashion blogs or any of that. I mean, because also some of them are very like hipster, right? And they're like, if you end up looking like a character from a steampunk novel, I don't think that's, you know, like that isn't that there are ways to do this right and ways to do it wrong, I guess, right? But you know, if you go into a men's clothing store and look around a bit and get a bit of advice maybe from the salesman there, I think that's often much of what you need to do, and that's about it, you know. Bob Wagner says, no offense intended, please stay closed. No offense taken. I do not want to expose myself to anybody here. And Fireboard says you and Ratchy's a dear style swap. No, I don't think so. Thank you very much. Judd Gossick says, as I understand it, James Radji started doing the Turkish bathhouse thing because someone on Twitter said he looked like he never took a bath, so now he always takes one. Well, he has that kind of disheveled look to him, doesn't he? VengerCon. I didn't realize it was this weekend. Steambub says, I saw Double D's stream. It was mainly on Grim Gym. Yeah, we're 120 in, and I haven't even gotten to Grim Gym yet. Sorry, guys. You know how this goes. Let me catch up here. Sorry says, can you tell us about Jungian psychology? I'm gonna say no, because otherwise we're never going to get to any of the rest of the live stream. So I'd probably best not. I'll advise you to instead read Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson. Yeah. All right. So anyways, we were talking about Gamers on Games. He did a number of stupid tweets. He also said Trump was impossibly stupid after getting shot at in yet another one of his shorts. Again, with this kind of smug look in his eyes. You know, it's just fucking, it's just so ridiculous, right? So he was saying that you know, what that he was trying to imply that Trump, having stopped his bodyguards and having raised his fist, and that this was somehow idiotic, and every normal person should see that was so stupid because he should have just ran away, right? Which is, I think, an enormous level. Just like, I think that's a lethal level of copium from someone who realizes that action that Trump just did has destroyed them, right? Like, it's destroyed their side forever. You know, like, there's nothing, because, and I bet you're going to see now a bunch of Democrats trying to act tough in different ways, all, you know, prefabricated ways, obviously. I don't think any of them are going to try to set up a political assassination or anything. I mean, I hope not. But, you know, I think that they're going to be doing a bunch of stuff that they're going to think makes them look manly and tough and patriotic, right? And it's all going to be horrible, because they're all going to be so horrible at it because they don't know how to do it naturally, because they're not manly or tough or patriotic by nature, right? That's the problem. You can't fake virility, right? You can't do it. You can't just pretend that it's something that you have if you haven't got it. And all of their attempts to do so will look ridiculous, right? It'll look like, well, like, you know, sometimes when you get like a Hollywood actor that is obviously not an action guy in an action movie or something like that, right? It'll just look so stupid and fake that no, but it'll bounce back at them, right? It'll actually hurt them more than anything. But they're going to be trying, because they're all going to be so desperate to find something that they can, some kind of image that they can project to counter one of the greatest political images of all time, right? Like, it is, how many other political images can you in American history are there that match that, right? There are some from wartime, right? Like, there are a few, but not a lot. You know, there's not a lot of stuff there. You know, this is like hero level stuff. This is Teddy Roosevelt country, like firmly in Teddy Roosevelt country. You know, it's crazy. Judd Gossick says, come to VengerCon, funded just a few miles south of the RNC convention. Well, I would love to go to both, but I'm a little bit out of the way here, guys. One of these days, when VengerCon hits it big, they'll probably invite me as a guest of honor, pay my ticket, and then I'll be there. But I think he's got a couple of more VengerCons to go before he hits the big time there. So even so, I'm sure VengerCon is an incredibly fun time. Every video I've ever seen of it, or every report I've ever seen on it, says that everybody who goes there has a great time. So I certainly advise people to try to go to VengerCon if they can. And I regret the fact that I live in a different continent and can't go there. maybe one of these days I will. Who knows? I mean, I've certainly got enough baptism of fire money to do it if I really wanted to. But I'm also, I spent basically from birth, right? I was the first time I was on a plane, I was an embryo. Okay, so let's put it that way, right? So I spent the first 30 years almost of my life traveling all over the world, right? An incredibly frequent amount of travel. And then I ended up picking Uruguay. And since then, I have, of course, traveled since then. I've been, to North America, to different parts of North America many times since then. I've been to other parts of South America. I haven't been back to Europe actually since then. It's been decades since I've been to Europe, but I'm probably going to have to go there pretty soon at some point. Anyways, but I haven't, but not nearly as much as before, and constantly less and less. And nowadays, anytime I can find an excuse not to have to travel, I don't, right? Because I traveled myself out, I guess, and now I'm in a place where I'm very comfortable, right? But of course, I'm sure at some point I can be convinced to get back to North America again and go to VentureCon. So I think I've talked enough about the gamers guy who is like the smallest fry of the three that I wanted to talk about. Xnard Prime says Montevideo, Uruguay is 35 degrees south. That's like Southern California in January. Yeah, but it's not the same climate as Southern California. But as a rule, you're kind of right in that in most of the time, Uruguay has fairly long summers that get very hot, very, very hot, right? And then it has fairly short winters. It has a period that's kind of cool-ish, and then the peak winter period where it usually gets to about maybe 10 degrees Celsius. So not terrible, but like well above snowing or freezing temperatures. Sorry, Meatball. But not warm by any means. It stays like that for a few weeks at most, right? But this year, because there was a La Nina effect that was particularly strong, and because there's been this movement of weather from the Antarctic in a northerly direction, we're on the Atlantic, right? It has been the coldest winter in 20 years. And again, like a couple of days ago, it was -1 here, and it's never -1. Like it never gets below freezing, right? I'm talking about Celsius here, obviously, but it never gets below freezing in Uruguay, and this is the first time in ages that I've ever seen that happen. All right. Anyway, so our second individual that I want to point out today is a character by the name. Oh, wait a minute, I'm looking at the wrong file here. Where was that? Oh, here we go. Is a character by the name of Indestructo Boy, that is Terran Pounds. He is a gaming guy who has, yeah, that's the right one. So he's a gaming guy who has mostly done some products for third-party 5th edition stuff, but he has also been a contributor on to a couple of other games, like OSR games, including Morkborg and Shadow Dark. Now, I want to be clear, I did not confirm if he's done third-party stuff that they did not particularly endorse, or if he did third-party stuff that was semi-official for Morkborg or for Shadow Dark, or if he's just done Morkborg and Shadow Dark that, or if he's actually done like a contribution to an official product of Morkborg or Shadowdark, right? So it could be any of those three. Maybe you guys know. If you do know, let us know in the chat. Yeah, the guy is very well known as a leftist provocateur, and he did not hesitate to jump on board. And I think the first thing that we got from him, hang on a sec, gotta grab a fight here. The first thing that we got out, actually, I should probably clean these pipes first. The first thing that we got out of him was when apparently there's a company called Sticker Mule, and Sticker Mule apparently makes labels and things like that, and stickers, I guess. And yesterday, when the shooting attempt happened, Sticker Mule made a tweet where they said Donald Trump was shot. I don't care what your political views were, but hate for Trump and his supporters has gone too far. And he basically, well, the company basically said we need to tone down the political rhetoric and our enmity. We are all Americans. These are all people that might be your family. They're and it was basically this kind of can't we all just get along sort of post. It was not a post that that suggested, it didn't condemn the left entirely. It condemned people who are calling for that seemingly were calling for Trump to be stopped in any way, etc. Right, by any means. But it wasn't, it wasn't a philippic against Democrats. It was a call for unity, right? It was a call for toning down the political rhetoric. And Indestructo Boy retweeted that saying, the Land of the Blind decals, I guess Land of the Blind is one of his products. I'm not familiar with any of his products, but I'm vaguely familiar with him as a tweeter more than anything. He said, the Land of the Blind decals were originally printed through Sticker Mule. I was even going to use them for the Vagabond crowdfunding add-ons. That is no longer the case, right? So he basically said that it's a step too far and you should be canceled if you have sympathy for the fact that Trump was shot and that and have called for an end to political violence, right? So that is a pretty bad take, right? It's definitely not a good take to have, right? But it could be interpreted in several ways, right? Like you aren't necessarily saying something too terrible there, right? Okay, I see people are mentioning that it's Soyclops. Yeah, apparently Indestructible Boy did not know how to handle some fireworks at some point and he lost an eye. So yeah, Soyclops, the Sorcerer, the Eye of Soiron. All right, we're getting all of those there. Indestructible Boy, who has a weakness for femboys, quoted apparently. So yes, this is clearly a winning guy, right? That was the first post, but then he goes forward, right? As some people ask him about this, including the people that drew his attention to me. They were saying, well, hang on, like, is this, are you sure you're not going too far from considering what this person said or something? And so he responded. He said, Trump has advocated for harm against his opponents for years, and he is now pushing for anti-LGBTQ plus policies. This isn't some give peace a chance moment. He's the owner's trying to paint Trump out to be some harmless victim here. He is not. So yeah, that is not good, right? The person he was interacting with pointed out that Trump has never advocated for any violence ever. And he said, the person that was responding to him said, well, denying children trans surgery isn't LGBTQ. Even so, it shouldn't be remotely the cause for the literal murder of a presidential candidate. Bad take, man. Which is all correct. And then Indestructible Boy responded again. He said, you're being intentionally dense here. I'm not talking about denying children trans surgery. Only fringe elements of extreme progressives are pro-gender affirming surgery for minors. Not true. We know it's not true, right? We know that it's something that is advocated by much more than that. But anyway. And then he goes, Trump asked for this, right? So here we are, Indestructible Boy having some extremely hot takes about essentially claiming that Trump asked for it, that he had demanded that he be shot at, right? That it's his fault, which is something, I wish I could say only somebody so marginal as Indestructible Boy said that, but that has been, in the last, the first 24 hours, CNN was trying to pretend that they weren't sure what happened. Maybe he wasn't even shot at all, whatever, right? And now in the next 24-hour cycle, they've switched to, well, Trump is largely responsible for this. It's his own fault because, his people, his beliefs are so incendiary and his people are so uncouth and whatever, right? And so, this is actually the fault of Trump himself, and this is like, CNN is saying it, MSNBC is saying it. They are trying to claim that there is somehow a justification for political violence based on people having views that they disagree with. That is in itself an incitement to violence. So there you go. Judd Goswick says, oh no, the decal company lost tens of units of sales. That's excellent. Shell Blackbow asks, what blend is in the pipe? Well, I'm about to fill up a pipe with Argento Latakia, which is obviously a Latakia English style blend. So yeah, Indestructible Boy is number 2. Besides having a weakness for femboy, he has a weakness for radical thinking and trying to rationalize political murder. That's essentially what he's doing there. Right? Greg Goldworm says, listen to Indestructible Boy. He obviously makes good life choices. Yes, Bob Wagner says, that's a lot like harming your spouse and saying, look what you made me do. More like not very Indestructible Boy, not around fireworks at least. I wonder if he now wants to ban fireworks. Does anyone know? Like, is he calling for fireworks control now because of his injury? Or does he actually continue to advocate for firework use? Corey Simrock says, you think you hate journalists enough, but you really don't. And that's absolutely true. No question about it. Let me see here, 1 second. I'm trying to find. All right. So let me see what else is being said here. Weakness for femboys during tribute. All right, what's the topic of discussion, says Unknown Clown? Well, right now we're talking about people in the gaming hobby who have had very, very bad takes on the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Scott says, Indestructible boy knows he's a terrible person. After embarrassing himself with one of his rants, he swore he wasn't going to post on Twitter ever again. That lasted like a week. Well, a lot of leftists swore that they were going to leave forever when Elon took over, and they're all pretty much back again because none of the other alternatives give them what they need, which is a place where they can spout off at the mouth. RPG Grandma says, dealing with a creeper man all this weekend. I got my contact info off the net via my lost dog post. Oh, sorry to hear about that. One does have to be careful about these things. Okay, never mind. I forgot I'd done some screen shooting. So, all right. So the next guy I'm going to talk about, is Grim Jim. And before I start that, I want to comment to everyone that if you're watching now, it's 101 people watching now. All right. So if you haven't yet, subscribe to my channel, hit the like button on this live stream, check out my other videos. And if you want to support me, obviously on a live stream, super chats are very welcome. The live stream isn't itself monetized. So if you want to send me some super chat bucks so that Meatball gets some more tuna, you're very welcome to do so. But besides that, you can check out my products. We were talking earlier about the Invisible College, which is a modern occult OSR RPG. Very great game. My current big project and the most successful game I've ever had so far, which is Baptism of Fire. Baptism of Fire is now look at how thick that is. So is Invisible College. They're both big boys. Baptism of Fire is a gold bestseller. It was #1 on drive-thru for a significantly long period of time. It's #1 on the OSR list for 8 weeks running. Oh, $2 from Scott. Tuna for Meatball. Thank you very much, Scott. I really appreciate that. My other products as well. If I have any time left over after we cover Grim Jim, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on in some of my campaigns, and you might find that interesting. And to especially check out Pundit Presents on DriveThruRPG, which is my old, I guess you could say, periodical of small products. And for the newer version on the Red Room store, it is the Pundit Files, which is currently up to issue number 16. There's stuff there that are source books, source materials for various games of mine, adventures, supplements, lots of stuff that you can apply to any OSR game, to any D&D based type game, plus lots of stuff that is specific to your favorite games. And there's lots more good stuff coming up pretty soon. Every couple of weeks there's a new issue, and every single issue just costs about $3.50. So if you can get someone to give you $3.50, you can buy an issue of the Pundit Files. Be sure to check those out. The latest one, as I mentioned earlier, is the Slavic World Tree. That's issue number 16, which presents the planar cosmology of the Slavs for Baptism of Fire. The one before was Weird Magical Objects, number 15, which has got a whole collection of about almost 30 magic items that are from my World of the Last Sun campaign. That's my epic Last Sun setting campaign that's been going on for 11 years now. And this has got a whole collection of some of the weirdest magic items, but also, they're all very... All these magic items are real magic items. Some of them have weird effects, some of them have side effects, etc. But they're all very unique. You're not going to find items like these elsewhere. There's a bunch of magic weapons, magic horns, including the Horn of Gonzo and the Horn of Dutchman and the Horn of Cousins. There's rings like the Ring of Public Service Announcement, magic potions, magic yogurt, the famous Primo Staff of Bill the Elf, the extremely tempting and powerful Deck of Heck, and the mighty artifact known as the Hand of Alan Moore. So that issue can also be yours for about $3.50. And the one before that was the first supplement for Baptism of Fire, the medieval city guide to Poznan, which is one of the major cities of Poland in the Baptism of Fire setting. It's kind of the commercial hub of the north. And it tells you all about that city and its environments, and about the mysterious magical oak wood that is near to that city, which is real, by the way. This is authentic stuff that has unique flora and fauna and alleged magical properties. So be sure to check all of those out. Any of the issues of the Pundit Files cost $3.50. Go to the Red Room store. The links are in the description below. If you expand the description right on this live stream right now, you click the little more button. It'll expand and show you links to all of my different products. Be sure to check them all out. Thank you very much. So, getting back to Grim Jim. But before that, one comment here. Rooster's Place says, Pundit, you and a few others keep me sane in this liberal wackadoo-soaked hobby that we have. Thank you for what you do. Well, stick close to the OSR, my friend, and there's quite a few of us that try to be focused on the game rather than on political propaganda, right? None of my games are political propaganda. You know, they really aren't. Some of them have politics in the setting of what's going on. Like, I mean, the War of the Roses in Dark Albion was a political struggle, but it's not being used as a reference to, it's not about like the modern day abortion debate or something like that. It's nothing to do with the modern day era, right? It's always to do with just what's going on in the setting, and it's not in any way representative of some kind of a metaphor for modern day politics, which is what they're doing all the time nowadays in everything else, right? I guess the closest thing to a political position of mine is maybe in the Invisible College, where the heroes are the guys that are standing up for the classical Western liberal ideals of the Enlightenment, you know, that sort of thing. But that's as political as it possibly gets. Steambob says, what happened to Spectre Press? Well, Spectre Press is still around. They're still, you know, the website's still on drive-through. They're still selling all the products. They're just being very slow about the next release of the, because I mean, we did 100. The plan was originally to do 100 issues of Pundit Presents. We did 110, as it turns out, and then the compilation volumes, right? So there's still a couple of compilation volumes left to come out, and they're going to happen, but they're taking more time about it, you know, and it's just Spectre Press is a small publisher, and all small publishers have that issue, right? They're not retired like Dom is. There's still a possibility that I might someday do another book with Spectre Press or other products, but yeah, they're just not quite as active as they were at the peak period when I did Pundit Presents. Shellback Bow says, what is special about Baptism of Fire? Well, Baptism of Fire is a complete RPG and setting with a whole bunch of sandbox tools at the end. You might look in my channel after the live stream, Bo, and you will see in the reviews category that I've been doing a few videos recently showing some of the content of Baptism of Fire and what it's about. So it's an OSR game, which means to say it's based on old school Dungeons and Dragons, but it is set in a medieval authentic version of early medieval Poland during the Piast dynasty in the 10th and early 11th centuries. So it's like the medieval world as the medieval people saw it. So it's got all the Polish monsters, the Polish magic. It's got all the medieval elements to it. It's very action-packed. It's an exciting product. And people have just loved it. The art is excellent. The production is excellent. That's not me. That's on Mad Scribe, who was here up to a little while ago. And people have just gone nuts for it. I don't know. It's I was not expecting it to be that successful, but it has been. I think the cover helped a lot. You know, there's something about that cover that turned out to be really impressive. You know, yeah. But it has been really big, and I'm very glad about that. And I thank everybody who's bought it. Shark says the rapper 50 Cent fully supports Trump. Well, that's good. I mean, you know, there was this just before this assassination attempt on Trump. I think it was the Daily Show. I think that was it. had like this panel of black voters, and they obviously didn't vet them because they were stunned when fully half of the black voters that they had on the show, that they were interviewing on the show about politics and the black experience or whatever, half of them said they were voting for Trump this time. This is monumental, right? Like before Trump got shot, he was already having like huge numbers with black voters, way higher than he'd ever had, right? And that started, make of this what you will, but it started to go up when he was being politically persecuted in the courts, right? I think obviously there are some black Americans that can feel a lot of sympathy for that. It went up more after the mugshot, right? But imagine what's going to happen now, right? Trump took a bullet, got up, and raised his fist and said, "Fight!" And like that is the kind of defiance that is, like everybody is looking at that, right? There's tons of people. I've seen a lot of bad tweets from liberals, right? But I've also seen a lot of tweets from people who aren't usually political that said, I didn't really like Trump a lot, but this is amazing, right? Like then they showed that picture, right? And it's something that is just, the value of it is unmeasurable, what that has achieved for Trump, And so like the whole movement, and there was a lot of push from the left calling for something to be done about Trump, right? And in some cases, implicitly saying whatever is necessary, right? And it has just backfired on them in a way that you wouldn't believe. It's stunning. Surly Unicorn says, "We're waiting for your Dwarven Baker's book, Pundit." Yeah, that is one that's not going to happen. All right, so there's a super chat, $5 from Mac. Thank you so much. He says the world needs less political violence and more meatball. I agree with that. Meatball is currently right on my lap at this moment, cold as it is. She has retreated to the lap, almost like basically the moment I sit down in front of my computer, she gets on that lap and she doesn't move, right, unless I force her off. So I would like pick her up to show her to you guys, but I think we ought to let her rest there. I don't know what you guys think. Do we want to perturb Meatball, or should we just leave her to relax on my lap? Let's get to this point here. So Grimjim, James Desborough. Now, Grimjim is obviously someone who has been a colleague of mine for a very long time, right? He has been, to his credit, an incredibly staunch defender of free speech. He is also a big opponent of the kind of PC political correctness. Those are the good things about it, okay? And in that, his anti-censorship stance included him defending products from people who had very different ideas from him, which includes me, right? And included, people like Zach S. and Venger Satanis and other people, James Radji. And Grim has been a producer of games for a long time. He's been making RPG products longer than I have, and has made some that are quite good, some that are not as good, I guess, but he's made some that are very good. Machinations of the Space Princess is probably to me his best book, but he's done others that have also been very interesting. And obviously, he was one of my co-hosts on Inappropriate Characters. He was one of the original 3 Inappropriate Characters. It was me, Grimjim, and Venger, right? 3 of the most, cancel attempted people in the OSR hobby, right? People that they tried to take out and couldn't. And he was the original tech guy. Excuse me. Venger was in Inappropriate Characters for the first couple of years. And then he resigned when the pandemic happened. And, Grimjim was exceedingly pro-lockdown even before there was the question of the vax, right? And then he became exceedingly pro-vax. And he took umbrage at the fact that I was opposed to the lockdowns because I had actually looked at the science. This is going to be a trend that you will note with Grim Jim. He claims to be a very intellectual, considerate guy, but he actually acts almost entirely out of his impulses and then just tries to create a narrative that supports it, right? So, you know, as of like April 2020, there was already very significant evidence that demonstrated that lockdowns were not sensible, right? Now, I might have had a few more contacts in that world of academia than Grim Jim could have had, right? But I was aware that the entire kind of justification for the lockdowns was coming out of one study that happened under Neil Ferguson at Imperial College. And that study ended up being proven by May to have been flawed. It was actually off by one entire decimal point in its estimate of how many people could die. And as it turns out, that was extreme as well. They didn't take into account mutation and how mutation has a tendency to reduce the lethality rate. So right away, I was very early on saying, you know, bugged out there for a moment. Are you guys still with me? I guess I start talking about vaxing and I get cut out of YouTube. So can you hear me? All right, I'm still here. Okay, good. I do think we blipped for a moment, right? But all right. So anyways, the point was that the idea of like total lockdowns was nonsensical almost from the beginning. Like after the first 3 months, there was no good argument for it. And in fact, there was an enormously good argument for saying that instead what we should do is the inverse of that, and is to like focus on protecting the most vulnerable people while everybody else has a normalized lifestyle, right? And Grim Jim took that to mean the pundit is a psycho, whatever, he wants people to drink bleach or something like that, and I'm leaving inappropriate characters. So he did. And that's fine. That's when after that, we went on to get the Florida Man. And that was pretty good for a while. And now we've got Ryan David, when Florida Man's personal life got in the way. But you know, I've always continued to defend Grim Jim's. I've always criticized his politics enormously, right? But that's fine. We've had lots of political fights. It didn't start with COVID or anything, because he is very much a laborite socialist, like strong socialist. He doesn't even pretend to be kind of like a Democrat sort of thing, right? He's a socialist. And he has terrible views. Almost every view he has on everything, on Brexit, on the European Union, on American politics, on British politics, almost all of them are uniformly horrible. They're wrong, and they're not just wrong, they're usually stupid, okay? And of course, he was going to do it here too. So Grim Jim's reaction to the attempted murder of Donald Trump was to do a post on Twitter that said, well, I guess that's it. Some form of fascism is, I can't do his Liverpudlian accent, but some form of fascism is coming to America now. And this time, that's not hyperbole, which is like quite the hot take. You know, it's like he's basically saying there, they tried to kill Trump, they didn't kill him, and now he's going to become, you know, the orange version of 1930s Mustache Man, right? Which is just a remarkable take, right? Because essentially, you know, like it is implied there, it's not explicit, but it is implied there that it would have been better had he been taken out, right? Then, you know, somebody points out, Ultra-American TTRPG, or good guy, points out that your opinions as a Brit on American politics are meaningless. Tell your government to let UK citizens be able to defend themselves properly, then we can talk. And Grim Jim responds by saying, distance allows for impartiality. See, he's really impartial, guys. He's so enormously impartial. I'll take our orders of magnitude lower crime and murder rates over gung-ho fantasies, which actually end up in worse outcomes most of the time. And whether we like it or not, America has an effect on the rest of the world. So that was his first take from that. And then other people were responding. Obviously, he got ratioed enormously bad. And when some other people called him on it, he said, like it or not, that's where it's headed. Fascism, he means, right? Being shot at doesn't make him less of a threat to your democracy or to world security. Like, the delusion in this man's head is just unbelievable, right? And so somebody asks him, what do you think the American fascism coming to America looks like? And here's his answer. The Project 2025 manifesto, in whole or in part, theocratic interventions, abrogation of reproductive and women's rights, persecution of the LGBT community, Muslims and actual left-wing groups, much like the worst parts of the 1950s and the Cold Wars, but it won't quite be like that. So this is what he says, right? What the hell just happened there? Sorry, can you guys hear me? Had a weird thing happen with the audio. Let me know if you can hear what I'm saying. Guys, yeah, you're okay? We hear me? Okay, good, just checking. So this is really funny by what he says there, because, you know, The Last Jedi was an atrocity of a film, but it did have one slight, tiny redeeming quality, which is that meme of Luke Skywalker saying, amazing, everything you just said there is wrong, right? And that is the case of what Grim Jim just said. And he repeats some of this in the video, which I assume Double D's thing was responding to his video. I don't know, maybe he was responding to his tweets as well. But in the video, he mentions, I think, Project 2025. And let's start with that. So Project 2025 is something that was being pushed really hard these last few days, just before Trump got shot at, right? And the claim was that this is Trump's agenda, this is Trump's project for when he's reelected, and that it's going to create the Handmaid's Tale in real life. It's going to turn America into a theocracy. It's going to repress the rights of minorities and women and everybody other than straight white males. And it's going to be, you know, women are going to be forcibly impregnated. Muslims will be sent to camps, and, you know, all this sort of stuff, right? There have been all kind of nonsense of it, and at every point they're going Trump's agenda Trump's Project 2025, right? Or agenda 2025, right? Or no, it's Project 2025, Agenda 47. Okay, hang on, because we're getting somewhere. So the first thing you have to know is the Project 2025 has nothing to do with Donald Trump, okay? Except in the dreams of the people who wrote it. So it was created by a think tank called the Heritage Foundation, and you can tell they're an old school traditional conservative think tank because they think that writing a 900-page manifesto is making a real difference for America. Right? Like, I'm sure that if we make the next article in, The Spectator, that's going to change everything. It's going to show the libs, and then they're going to be doomed because we wrote this article, and we put out an article on Breitbart, and now that's the end of the problem. You know, like that's the classic thinking of these old school cons. The Heritage Foundation is, of course, a religiously conservative organization that believes in social conservatism, and specifically in religious conservatism. But they're not, Trump isn't tied to them. I mean, they support Trump, but he doesn't support them. He's never said that he's united with them. He hasn't said he's taking on that manifesto. He's accepting it. On the contrary, Trump has, if you go to Trump's campaign website, he has his own agenda. He's saying exactly what he's going to do after he's reelected, and it's called Agenda 47, okay, which is 47 because it's the 47th president, right? And it is a number of point form descriptions, not 900 pages, thank God, right? And that's the thing. Nobody on Twitter who's talking about Project 2025 has actually read it, the whole thing. I haven't read the whole thing. I've actually gone to the website, and I've looked at some of the key points that they're putting there in the Heritage product or in the Heritage Foundation. But I haven't read the whole thing. Nobody has. It's too big, right? But none of these people have. Grimjim absolutely is not. He hasn't even gone to their website and looked at it, right? He doesn't understand that it has nothing to do with Trump. He doesn't understand what it's mostly about, because actually what it is mostly about, Project 2025, is that what they want to do is not specific to Trump, but Trump is part of their plan. They want to create a whole new generation of civil servants that were brought up as evangelicals, they were brought up as Christians, they were brought up in conservative families, they went to conservative colleges, and then instead of going into business or things like that, they go into the civil service to occupy those spaces. It is reverse entry. So it's a long march through the institutions. For 50 years, the left has gradually taken over every part from the bottom all the way to the top of every institution in America. And the Heritage Foundation, and they're right about this, understand that the way to stop that is by massive entryism of the right in those same institutions, which has to happen partly from the bottom up, because it doesn't help. Like, it doesn't matter if Trump is president if he can't find anyone to take over in the Treasury Department or the Justice Department who isn't a massive liberal communist or socialist or anarchist or Antifa person, right? If that's all that he has to choose from, then it doesn't matter that he's president. The foundations and the institutions themselves will continue to be corrupted. So the biggest part of what Project 2025 is about is bringing up a whole new generation of young people who enter into the bureaucracy of government and gradually take over the institutions. Okay, so that's their main gist. Within that, they have agenda points of what they hope to end up achieving. And of course, some of the things that they're pointing out are things that are fairly compatible with Trump's ideas. Some of them are not really part of Trump's ideas at all. And some of them are things that Trump might be sympathetic for, but that are not big on his agenda, right? The biggest things on Trump's agenda is closing the border, mass deportations, both of which are very good ideas, and then restoring the economy. He says he's going to eliminate, and this is now Agenda 47. These are Trump's actual points. Right? He's going to eliminate the Department of Education at the federal level, which is a brilliant thing to do, because if you look at the Constitution, education was never part of the federal government's mandate, right? So get rid of it. And then that will move everything to the states. And generally what he's trying to do, on the contrary to the claims of this Project 2025, the people that are pushing the fake claims about Project 2025, that it's going to turn into, America into a theocracy of total top-down fascist control, right? Everything Grimjim said is wrong, right? Even if Project 2025 was actually Trump's agenda, that isn't what was going to happen. Because even Project 2025 is largely pushing for a reduction in the power of the federal government. But Trump's is actually more extreme in terms of that reduction in many respects. So he is looking to get rid of a whole bunch of the top-down power of the federal government and move things to the states, right? So like Project 2025, one of the things they do push for, because they're evangelical Christians, they want to have a total abortion ban become the law at the federal level. So anywhere in America, you couldn't have an abortion, right? Now, that's a view that a lot of Christian conservatives have. I'm sure that some of the people watching me right now hold that view, right? It is, however, not the view of the majority of the American people, but neither is the standard thing that Democrats try to push as this is the normal thing, Roe v. Wade, where there are no limits at all, where you can abort a baby up to the moment of birth, right? Up to literally the second it's coming through the birth canal, you can still kill it, right? That is not normal either. The majority of American people do not agree with that. Most of Americans believe that abortion should be legal somewhere around the first trimester, right? The first 3 months, maybe 4 months. And then after that, support drops, right? So, and that is very much in keeping with most other countries in the world, right? Like in most countries in Europe, that's the normal law in most places. It's not unlimited up to the 9th month. You don't see that in most European countries, right? So, you know, the leftists always say, oh, we should be more like France. We should be more like the Netherlands, you know, we should be more like Denmark. Well, all those countries have, you know, limits to abortion. They do, right? But Trump is more radical. He's actually saying, what I want to do is say the federal government has no say in abortion. Each state should decide, right? That is what he's pushing for. That's not agenda. That's not Project 2025. That's his Agenda 47. That's what he actually is standing on and what he's running on. That's what he actually believes. Nowhere in Agenda 47 is there a call for the persecution of the LGBT community. I think that there isn't one in Project 2025 either. They just don't want to create special rights for the LGBT community, right? But Trump doesn't have much to say either way about that, right? You can bet that Trump isn't going to be pushing for the federal government to mandate official declarations of all, you know, what is it now? We're up to like 120 days out of the year that are LGBT special days that the Biden White House recognizes. I'm pretty sure that's going to come to an end, right? But he's not. Nobody is calling for the persecution of LGBT people. They're calling for them to probably shut the fuck up a little bit, right, and stop trying to impose a hated agenda on normal people, right? I don't mean being gay or being trans or being lesbian. I mean the extremist agenda that keeps constantly being pushed by the activists. That is what people hate, right? And that is something that is not, you know, that's not really a very good strategy for LGBT activists to take, right? Like you don't really, it's not a good plan if you have been if you're in a tiny minority of the population, which is still what LGBT people are and always probably will be, if unless you vastly expand the definition of LGBT, right? Which to some extent some people are doing, because you got people who are like, you know, something like 40% of Gen Zers claim that they're non-binary, and yet they still only engage in heterosexual sex, and they don't actually change anything of how they dress or how they, you know, they're not on hormones or anything, right? So they're basically just straight people that want to belong to LGBT because right now that gives you special favors, right? But so unless you do stuff like that, though, there's still a tiny minority and they're always going to be at risk of persecution. So you think that if they could instead, you know, say we want to just lead normal lives and we're not trying to push anything on you, but we also don't want you to persecute us, you know, that is the normal status quo. And for a little while in the 90s and the early 2000s, it looks like that was what was going to happen. And then, of course, everything went sideways when the postmodernists took over and decided, no, we're going to tear down Western civilization. Unfortunate. But again, Trump has no interest, Grim, in oppressing the LGBT community or Muslims, except for the ones that are in the country illegally, who he wants to deport. And that makes sense. People shouldn't be in countries illegally. And again, I say this as someone who has himself lived in multiple countries. I am the son of immigrants. I'm the grandson of refugees, right? And, you know, I'm Latino, right? And in every respect, all of those things mean is that there's nothing more insulting than the middle class Western leftist declaring that it is in my interest for millions of people to enter a country illegally without documentation and be allowed to do whatever they want, right? Like that is not, that isn't the point, right? Like that is an insult to people who are real refugees. That is an insult to people who really go through the process of immigration. You know, Trump has said that he wants to encourage the immigration of skilled people into the United States. That is part of his agenda. It's not part of Project 2025. It's part of Trump's Agenda 47. Right. So everything Grimm said was wrong. Every single point of what he made there was wrong. But he's never going to buy that, right? He's never going to accept that because Grimm never believes he's wrong about anything. He just comes into total denial while he pretends that he's the most rational person in the room, you know? So, this goes on Twitter to say, somebody responded to Grimm and said, speaking as someone who hates the guy, that is to say, he hates Donald Trump, the person who's saying this, a guy named Barnghoul, says, speaking as someone who hates Trump, we'd be a lot closer to fascism if they actually kill him. Grim Jim's response is, no, he'd be out of the way and pretty much anyone else is more sane and centrist. My dude, believe me, Donald Trump is so much more centrist than anybody on the Democrat Party. And he is considerably more centrist than a whole bunch of people that could come after him if you're not careful. Because, like I said, Trump isn't Caesar. Trump is, if anything, he's like Gracchus, right? He's the guy trying to save the system. He's the guy trying to reform the system to save it from the corruption that has been taken over. If, like the Romans did, you kill Gracchus, that's when you're going to get Marius, and then Sulla, and then you're going to get Caesar. And then that's the end of your democracy, okay? Because killing Gracchus is that moment that you can't come back from, when people are going to say, okay, the entire system is rigged. There's no chance for us to win by the democratic means. So that's when we're going to jump to non-democratic means. That's when everything goes wrong, right? So after Grimm tweeted that, Venger jumped in and said, dude, delete this tweet and nuke your account. And I don't always find myself saying this, but I totally agree with Venger's sentiment there. I'm not sure he should nuke his account, but at this point, I don't know. I think he's too far gone to really be saved anyway. Maybe he should just nuke his account at this point, because there's very little way to justify any of this, right? So it's really unbelievable, the level of nonsense of what he's putting up there, right? Grim Jim goes on to say, America still doesn't really have a left, and this vaguely sane political orientation has been right to sound the alarm. The vaguely sane political orientation he's referring to, by the way, is Biden, right? He's talking about Biden and about CNN. Those are the people he thinks are sane in American politics, right? Trump was already going to be terrible and fascistic. This is just going to make it even worse and speedier and harder to resist. Right. Well, Trump, as I pointed out, Trump has no plans of being fascistic. Terrible is a relative term. And what this is going to do, it's going to make Trump much more popular. Grim Jim is right about that. That's what he's realized. It's viscerally, he hates Trump. Viscerally, he wanted Trump to die. And now he's rationalizing it all in his head by pretending he's being super logical about this, which he does constantly, okay? So in the video, which I'm sure is what Double D probably mainly went after, because Double D has all these production values, right? I'm a boomer. I have no idea how to use any of this. It's a miracle every time that I manage to connect on the live stream, okay? It's a wonder that I've been able to have any successful live streams at all, okay? So I can't put his video on this screen. I don't know how to do that. I'd need other software. This is why we have a technical guy for inappropriate characters, right? So I'm not really going to focus very much on the video. But on the video, he did also talk about, Project 2025 or whatever. And he went further than that. I'm going to get to that a bit on the video. But one of the things he said is that he knows that some people are going to be mad at him. But the problem is that not everyone has as nuanced a view of politics as he has. Grim, let me tell you something, buddy. I'm very sorry. I know that you probably think that you're the smartest man in the room. But speaking of someone who is often the smartest man in the room, who has the degrees to prove it, and who, at the same time has always been around rooms of people that are often smarter than I am, right? Which is saying quite a lot, actually. You are a guy. You know how sometimes we say so-and-so is the stupid person's idea of an intellectual? You have created that idea in your own head, and you are projecting it. Okay, you are largely a know-nothing who works almost entirely on feelings, not on intellect. Almost everything you do is based on your immediate first impulse of what you think you're going to like or not. And a lot of that is based on subconscious grievances you have to the world because you have largely been a failure in being able to succeed in this society. And so, like most would-be socialists or communists, you have a resentment against this society. And on account of that, you take all of that jumble of stuff, but because you want to imagine yourself as a sophisticate, again, as many socialists do, and almost none of them are, you then project this into what you try to envision as this Potemkin village, this facade of being an intellectual. Nothing of what you've said is intellectual here, and you've proven it by citing things that are patently untrue and not being able to defend those things, which you never are. Right? You always just fall back to making either false statements or statements of pure opinion. And it's very sad, okay, but I have to call you out on this. You are inventing things whole hog to suit the agenda of your id, okay? That's what you're doing, and it's very pathetic. You are one of the least nuanced people I know. You are someone who is always going to be utterly predictable. Every opinion you have, and this is why there are these incongruities in your opinions, that for example, you're super socialist, but you're also very free speech. They have to do with your own personal impulses. You don't like being told you can't say something, so you're super free speech. You want to imagine a government where they're going to pay you money to be a philosopher, so you want socialism, right? Those are the only reasons. There's no logic behind what you've done. There's no great process of, little gray cells that you're working through to determine the objective truth. You are nothing but a bundle of feelings that is masquerading as a smart person. Okay, that's what you're doing. So that's I know that's quite the takedown, but and I'm sorry for it, but it's just the truth, and somebody has to tell it to you before you go even further, which he did in his video. And I'll get to that now, that in the video, I can't show you the video, unfortunately, but in the video, he basically makes this argument that, when you have people who are truly dangerous to democracy, then anything is justified to be done against them. And he does this as examples in the video. 1930s mustache man, right? Rhymes with Hilter. Stalin, who he says, well, there's some people that feel this way about Stalin, and we can understand it. He doesn't actually say he feels that way about Stalin. He goes on to say, because, Stalin killed a lot of people too, and, would you have stopped him if he killed a lot of people? Of course, he killed a lot of people mostly by accident. He didn't plan very well. He literally says this shit. Why? Because Stalin is a socialist, right? So obviously, Stalin couldn't just be a psychotic mass murderer, right? Because he's a socialist, and Grimjim thinks he's a socialist, which, I guess he kind of is. All, parasites and socialists are basically the same thing, right? So, this is sad, right? But this is what he does. He goes and he says that, Stalin is a bit less justified, but you can understand why some people would try to kill him. And then, other people who are horrible monsters, like Margaret Thatcher. Okay, so for his examples are Guy That Rhymes with Hilter, Stalin, and Margaret Thatcher, and then Trump. Okay, so in this man's mind, all these people were people that it could be very easily justified why you should kill them. In his example on Margaret Thatcher, he said, well, because she was very mean to LGBT people in the 1980s, right? Because she had suggested that gay people with AIDS should be put into medical camps to quarantine them so that they wouldn't infect other people. Except I'm pretty sure Grimjim supported putting people into camps during COVID. Didn't you, Grimjim? I'm pretty sure you did. So, if it's good enough for Thatcher, what does that say for you? Hey, Meatball's getting up. All right, Meatball's up. There's Meatball. She's still not happy at being lifted up, but she's up. I'm sorry, Meatball. All right, so that is his argument. He's literally claiming that all four of those people are the same. He is ignoring the fact that two of those people were democratically elected and remained democratically elected for their entire career so far in Trump's case. In Margaret Thatcher's case, she was elected 3 times. She resigned after, you know, the end of her term, and there was no element of it that was not the will of the people, right? Unlike Stalin, who wasn't elected by anyone, right? And Guy, who rhymes with Hilter, that was part of a extremely imbalanced political system in the Weimar Republic, and then subverted that system, and his party was able to take over and then immediately instituted a dictatorship, right? So none of this makes any sense to any normal person. It is only something that someone who has the thought processes I happen to have just explained that Grim Jim has could look at that and think he's being a reasonable, nuanced person. That is nuance in Grim Jim's eyes, okay? So it's really, really pathetic, okay? And I think that's about all I have to say about Grim Jim, but let's see what you guys have been saying while I've been saying all this. Corey Simrock says, disturb the meatball at your own risk. She's a spicy meatball. Yes, she is. I loved that the picture that I took for the link to this live stream happened to be Meatball, having a very mean face reminiscent of the, you know, that mugshot face of Trump's. And she's lifting up a paw in solidarity, you know, like it was just the perfect shot. Happened more or less by accident, but it was so funny. Judd Goswick says, Grim has some good games, but bad takes. He's trying to win his way back into the fold of the left. He never will, for the same problems that Zach S. never will, right? Both of these guys, you're right, both of these guys are instinctively leftist, but they have been rejected by their own tribe. This is their great tragedy. They are outcasts. And, you know, in Zach's case, it's because he did porn. In Grim Jim's case, because he did some sexy party type RPG products that were then condemned by feminists, right? So they're never, ever going to get back in, right? I will say that there's a difference between Zach and Grim in that Grim has been much more consistent in his stance on censorship, right? Whereas Zach has been so-so and increasingly less so over time. OSRDM says Jim should have waited a week or two before running drivel out of his mouth. Yep. Surly Unicorn says he had my respect on freedom of speech, but calling us all fascists is a little too much to put up with. I have zero tolerance. Diversity and Dragon says Jim is for free speech except for fascists, and to him Republicans are fascists. Ergo 100 million people are fascists. Ergo 100 million people don't deserve free speech. Yes, I don't know if he would say that every single Republican is a fascist. In fact, some of what he recently tweeted, his fantasy idea that if Trump had died, then you'd get someone more centrist and moderate than Trump in the Republican Party taking over, seems to suggest that he doesn't actually think that every single Republican is a fascist, but he certainly thinks Trump is and people that support him. Jack Elmy says, my tolerance for Grim Jim ended yesterday. I think a lot of people feel that way. Judd Gossick asked, does Jim read the New Republic or the Atlantic? I'm not sure he reads either of those. I'm not sure if he reads anything, actually, but I would think if he read anything at all, then it's probably something that is more radical than that and less reliable than the Atlantic, which says a lot. Surly Unicorn asks, has he seen London? I presume he has, but probably hasn't gone to the parts that would go against his imagination. OSRDM says Jim comes off as a paranoid who never leaves his house. Well, you know, that's no comment. Keysrill, sorry if I got your name pronounced wrong there, says, man, that's hilarious since Grim Jim deleted my comment pointing out Trump, was the first running president to be pro-gay. Yeah, that's right, actually. In 2016, Donald Trump was the first presidential ticket candidate to have ever been in favor of LGBT rights from the beginning of his campaign. He said so. There's that moment where he had his rainbow flag moment and everything, right? And he's always said he doesn't really care if you're gay or not, right? And Obama did. Obama ran at the time he ran his first campaign. He ran as saying marriage is between one man and one woman. I think the difference there is that Obama was lying at that moment and Trump was telling the truth, because Trump's a New York guy. I mean, New York guys don't really care too much about that. They just don't want it. They don't want dumbass stuff rubbed in your face, but they also don't really care what you do with your personal life. Eric C says, I unsubbed yesterday. Grim is drinking the woke Kool-Aid, says Raving Bean. RPG Grandma says, and Israel undermined too is one of the Project 25 rant. I'm not sure what you mean by that, RPG Grandma. But I mean, a lot of the people who are claiming that Trump would be a fascist because of Project 25 are also people that hate Israel, that are in support of Hamas, basically. Whereas Trump is the most pro-Israel president of presidential history, basically. Like he's the guy that put the embassy in Jerusalem, recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. He was the architect of the Abraham Accords. If Trump had been reelected in 2020, he would have instituted those accords, and there would have been basically a trade agreement between Israel and most of the other countries of the Middle East that would have ensured peace between those countries. The so-called Palestinians would have been completely sidelined and would have been forced to achieve a separate negotiation for some kind of peace deal with Israel, or there would have been police action that would have taken out Hamas, and they would have been broadly supported. Trump has already said that if he's president again, he's going to completely back the elimination of Hamas, which is, that would be a gift to the world, So there we are. Nathan Laram says, the black community now has Trump's vote as a black man. I am so done with white liberals telling me who I am. Well, you are representative of a very important percentage. We don't know exactly how much is actually going to turn out, of course, because there have been other times when it looked like, including the last two times Trump ran, he did better with the black community than obviously his immediate predecessors did. He did better than Romney or than what was his name? McCain. He did better than either of those. And, but he didn't do as well as some people thought he was going to do. But it is very obvious now. There does seem that there is he is going to have a big jump in terms of compared to the other times. And that is very bad news for the Democrats, because they depend on this kind of the Obama Rainbow Coalition, you could call it, right? The coalition of all the minorities and LGBT people and feminists and all of that. And if too many of those guys don't show up, even if they don't, never mind they voted for Donald Trump, even if they don't vote for anyone, that collapses the Democrats' chances, right? Steve Cavada says, rationalizing or cheering what happened yesterday is the problem. I used no words for YouTube in my last post. Yeah, well, YouTube is careful about the no words. RPG Grandma said, brands about Project 25 are crazy on it. They are crazy because it's, like, again, even if it was Trump's agenda, which it isn't, right? Trump has his own agenda. His agenda is really good, in my opinion. Most of Project 2025 is actually pretty good also, right? They're very right that you have to retake the institutions. You have to do it, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be with religious conservatives, but it has to be with conservatives. and they have to go into the institutions. They have to go to the school boards. They have to go to the education departments. They have to go to, at every level, at local, state, and federal level, they have to go to all the bureaucracy and take it over and then hold on to it, because otherwise you cannot fix this, right? The Chevron case has been very helpful in that now the bureaucracy has suddenly found itself cut off at the knees in terms of their ability to just invent crap out of nothing, which they could do for the last 40 years. They could just invent new rules and say, well, you know, what was written in the Act of Congress about our particular department implies this, so we're going to start doing it, right? So that's how they expanded a whole bunch of stuff that was meant for like civil rights, as in the rights of, you know, Black people, and expanded it into meaning, well, the rights of transgender women, or the rights of, you know, differently abled lesbians, or whatever, right? Like anything like that, right? Like they suddenly invented rights that were not explicit by that ruling that had happened 40 years ago, and that's now been overturned by the Supreme Court. So that is a huge advantage, but it's still not enough if the people doing the bureaucracy are all socialists, right? That has to be purged. But the world that would exist if everything in Project 2025 was instituted would be a more religiously conservative America. It would not be a theocracy. Yeah, there's no part of this agenda that suggests on dismantling democracy, right? It suggests enshrining certain values, right? Like, you know, putting in their attempted ban on abortion. They would change the interpretation of the First Amendment back to something closer to what it had been for most of its history, which is to say that it is meant to prevent the state from interfering with churches. It's not meant to say that you cannot have religious activity in the context of things like schools, right? So it would change stuff like that. But it wouldn't be the Handmaid's Tale, right? But it's also not what Trump is going to do. Trump's going to do something else, which is going to be a bit more libertarian. It's going to be focused. I think it's better, apart from the, you know, there is the detail about having that that bureaucracy is something that has to happen. But I think, you know, Chris Rufo's on that too, right? And I think I really hope that when Trump becomes president, he gives Chris Rufo some position where he can, like, he should be the bureaucracy czar or something, and his job is going to be to do what Milei did in Argentina, right? Where he's going to look at, okay, there's 25 government offices, these 10 are gone, afuera, right? And there it goes, right? Because that's what has to happen. You have to dismantle most of the federal government and return a whole bunch of these powers to the individual states, because that is how you prevent the Civil War. Because you are never going to have a situation where, if the law being applied is based on what people in New York City or Seattle want, and they're applying that to people living in like Alabama or Arkansas, that's not going to function, right? That is why the Federalist concept was the way it was, right? It was meant to be a situation where different states would have in their internal policies different positions, right? And so then you can decide, you can move, right? If you live in Alabama and you want unlimited abortions, okay, you move to California, right? If you're in California, you don't want unlimited abortions, or you don't want your kids being taught about becoming trans, right? Then okay, you can move to Arkansas, right? And then that works itself out, you know. But it doesn't work if you have a federal government that says, no, everybody has to do this, right? Everybody has to do it the way that we think it is. And that federal government, in turn, is under the control of a bunch of postmodern communists, social communists. Steve the Drifter says he's an occultist like Styx, and I also assume Pundit has slightly more permissive stances on abortion than God-fearing men. Okay, well, to begin with, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, Zeev. And you know, anyone who doesn't, who wouldn't define himself as God-fearing is pretty much a fool. Okay. The question is, what is God, right? But secondly, my position on abortion personally is that I think it's an absolute abomination. Right? That it should almost never happen. Right? Like there could be some kind of a medical situation that would justify it. Otherwise, no. It is, you know, it's murder. That's my position on it. Okay. However, my personal position, as opposed to a political position, is two different things, right? Like, and I think that, you know, if you believe in a democratic system, you have to sometimes make those compromises, right? And what you want to do is you want to make it in a way that's fair, right? And so, like, if you have a place where the majority of people disagree with you on that subject, you may have one of the costs of living in a with all of the benefits that are presented in a liberal constitutional democracy. And I mean liberal in the classic sense, not in the modern day sense, right? Means that you might have to accept in a certain community, people have a certain view, and they're going to want to make rules on that view. And then your options are either to somehow manage to change their mind so that they will vote something else, or go somewhere else. Those are the options, you know. Let's see what else people have said here. Is Grim Jim too old to be drafted to Ukraine? Yeah, I think he's pro-Ukraine war too. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure he's anti-Israel. I think, but I'm not sure. I haven't seen him say too many about either of those things. Royster's Place says Trump is Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus. I don't really think he's Cincinnatus. I think that's a bit too far back in the past. I mean, honestly, your Cincinnatus was pretty much George Washington. I think Trump is basically an equivalent to, I know it's not exactly the same policies or anything, but he's an equivalent to the Gracchi. I mean, he like Gracchus, he recognized that the oligarchy had become corrupted and that it had become completely disconnected from the plebeians, right? And that a government that worked that way could not survive, right? And so he sought reforms. And that's what Trump wants to do. Shirley goes, oh yeah, what a paradise we've been treated to under Biden. XR Prime says, you're a boomer. You're that old. No, I'm not a boomer. I'm Gen X. I become a boomer when I'm trying to use anything technological, though. I'm a technological boomer. Dale Servio says, Grim is the king of passive aggressiveness. OSRDM says, another thing about Jim is that he has never set foot, as far as I know, in the US and has no idea how Americans think. I am in fact Gen X Mac. Yeah, I just meant to say technologically I'm a boomer. When it comes to using anything technological, I'm very bad at it. Which is funny because I'm using technology all of the time, right? But I'm always using it in terms of like the technical part of it in the most marginal ways possible. Damn, Survey goes, Pundit is going beast mode. Thank you. Zeeb Drifter says, normally he doesn't apologize for ripping into people. Yeah, but, you know, again, Grim and I have a history. OSRDM says, over-medicated bundle of feelings. Yes. Xnard says, scorch on Grim Jim, but it's not like Mr. Grim wasn't asking for it. Suddenly lost my space here. Oh, there we go. Socialist Candyland. Rhymes with Bette Midler. Yeah. Max says he slammed Dragon too. Yes, he did. Diversity and Dragons. LOL, Stalin, Thatcher, and Trump. What an imbecile. Sadwings Raging, Based Iron Lady. Yeah, she certainly was. OSRDM says, I lived in England. A lot of Brits hated Thatcher. Yeah, but the ones who hated Thatcher were mostly idiots, you know. Thatcher was the last great champion of the British middle class. There were a lot of the elites that hated her, and there were a lot of the working class that hated her because they couldn't see that she was what she was trying to do was to get them to a point where they would actually have the same level of prosperity. They were just worried. They were all just unionized. They were all captured basically by the old school labor socialists, and had a lot of trouble understanding what she was doing. Zeeb Drifter says, "Oh boy, he's like Alan Moore, constantly pissing and moaning about the 1980s politics." North of the Rockies says he's like a two-eyed Cyclops. Steam Bob says he hasn't blocked me yet, and I mainly comment on his incorrect use of fascist. Fascism goes with socialism and communism like bread and butter. The reason I voted for Trump in 2020, even though I didn't vote for him in 2016, was because of no new wars. Yeah. I mean, Trump was also the most anti-military industrial complex president since Eisenhower. Let me see here what else people are saying. It was funny when Trump showed up at the Libertarian convention. Yeah, that was funny. And then it was funny how the Libertarians ended up picking the worst possible person to be their candidate. Trump isn't a libertarian, obviously, in the purest sense, but he has more libertarian leanings than most. Well, he has more libertarian leanings than any Republican candidate, I think, in my lifetime. $5 super chat from Eric G. Explain simply the difference between fascism and communism. And what do you think of solo roleplay RPGs? Damn it. All right. So fascism and communism are two different things if you take their original definitions, right? Communism is the original definition. It's actually the end stage of socialism, where the idea is that socialism is the product of a workers' revolution. You know, this is Marx we're talking about, right? The product of a workers' revolution against end-stage capitalism, which would lead to massive poverty and repression. This was Marxist theory, right? That as capitalism and industrial capitalism got bigger and bigger, you'd have people living more horrifically oppressed lives in this service of these of the bourgeoisie and the aristocracy, and it would lead inevitably that these crushing, terrible quality of life that the average worker would suffer under capitalism would lead them to revolt and capture the means of production and establish socialism, which would involve a dictatorship of the proletariat that would then begin to end property and then institute a gradual process that would eventually lead to true communism, which would be essentially a kind of anarchy where there was no longer any need for a government because everybody's property would be common. That was the idea of communism, right? Communism in practice was actually always just the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is to say, actually not the proletariat at all being in charge, but rather a group of political activists that become the Communist Party, the leader of which is usually a brutal dictator who would then impose total control over all aspects of industry. You know, there would be no independent companies, no independent businesses, no independent properties, right? No independent farms. That's communism, right? Fascism is very different. Fascism is a collaboration between a powerful centralized state and a corporate system where corporations are given special privileges and special benefits as their part of the bargain in exchange for them acting in Congress with the centralized control of the leadership of the government, which may be a strong man, a Benito Mussolini type, or there's a meatball, or it might be a committee or what have you, right? So in fact, there is fascism in America today because that description, that Italian model of what fascism was meant to be, right? Because otherwise, there is no other good definition of fascism aside from the original Italian definition. That's an actual real definition. Everything else that has been called fascism since then has really just been any type of autocratic dictatorship that doesn't openly identify itself as socialist or communist, and some cases even some that do, right? Like the National Socialists in Germany were declared fascists, right? And to be fair, they had a system that was closer to Italian fascism than to any kind of real socialism. So the Italian model of fascism is basically that you have a very powerful central federal government that controls every aspect of people's lives. But it does allow property. It does allow individual property. It does allow individual work and employment. And it allows, therefore, for powerful oligarchs in the oligarchy of that society to become wealthy. And those oligarchs, in turn, in their corporate businesses, will end up following an agenda dictated to them by the government and will act as privatized government operatives. And that is exactly what has happened in the last 10 years in the United States and in most of the West, where you see this. You see that these big corporations are following the agenda of the leftists who control the government. So, like literally in the Twitter files, we saw they were being given money, millions of dollars by the federal government to ban or block social media posts of actually true things that the government chose to not want publicized, right? So they became a privatized propaganda ministry in the case of Twitter. In other cases, there are other types of propaganda efforts, like Disney and everywhere the DI has been implemented. That is all part of the kind of fascist product of America. America is under threat of fascism. Trump is the guy who's trying to end it, right? He's trying to break that. So this is the irony of it, is that Grim Jim is completely wrong. Now about solo RPG, you got a lot in on one little one little super chat, and you got a lot from that, I'll grant you. In terms of solo gaming, I have never been a fan of solo gaming, I have to admit. I don't really see the point, It's like, it's something that's meant to be done in a group. And here you are doing it by yourself. There's I have my doubts. Okay. However, I will point out that social gaming usually, solo gaming has to usually be done in a kind of sandbox format for it to work, in the sense that you're creating the setting as you go along, because otherwise you already know what's going to happen. So how would that work, right? So the tools, ironically, that I have in Baptism of Fire or in products like Sword and Caravan, or um, in the Cult of Chaos book, all of these generators that I have in the Gonzo Fantasy Companion too, they work as something that it's meant to be for a sandbox DM to run up for a party of players in a sandbox game. But I had people point out in Baptism of Fire and in Sword and Caravan that especially with the Wilderlands source book and Sword and Caravan, they have become so my generators have become so sophisticated that you can use them as a solo game, right? You just roll the tables and then go with what's happening in the tables, and you've got a game that you could be playing completely by yourself without a DM, essentially, using your own creativity, I guess, to a certain degree. Because what they certainly can do in both of those campaigns, and I've seen that, I know this from playing it myself. This is how I run my Baptism of Fire and my Sword and Caravan game. That I don't do any prep. The player characters decide what they're doing, and between the setting content and the randomizers that are there for when you're traveling, when you're going to a city, rumor tables, adventure seeds, etc., by using those, the adventure generates itself. And I've had several times that my players have asked, like, oh, how did you think of this? Or I didn't think of it, I rolled it, right? And because it works so well that it seems as though it's an adventure that I had planned. And they get confused as to how I could have planned it when they didn't know where I was going, where the party was going. They didn't know, I couldn't have possibly have invented it, and yet it looked to them as though it was something I'd already worked out, like pre-game, right? But I didn't. I just kept using the generators, and that's, if you can do that with a group, you can do that by yourself. And so that's about everything I have to say about solo gaming. I still think it's always better to do it with a group, especially since at the very least nowadays with the internet, you can find a group of people and play online. You can all be in different parts of the world. As long as you can agree on a time and a place to meet, you can play with others, but whatever. That's up to each person. So what else have we got here? Geez, now I just jumped. It's very hard to keep up with these. With you guys have so much chat going on. Xnark says Grim Jim supports Israel. He's Jewish heritage. I never heard of him being Jewish heritage. Subatoy Stormborn says, "What's up with the 5 foot tall, overweight women that are part of the Secret Service now?" Yeah, it looked like a movie. Right? It looked like female Ghostbusters or something. Well, apparently, the head of the Secret Service under Biden is a woman who says that the central mission of the Secret Service now needs to be diversity, equity, and inclusion. It doesn't actually have that much to do anymore with protecting the president, apparently, but there you are. Though I would guess probably Biden's Secret Service detail is full of tall, very bulky men that would make good human shields, unlike Trump's. Alexander Clark says, "I love your live stream. I'm just watching while I'm about to be homeless because I keep been going back to the hospital." Well, sorry to hear that, Alexander. Ultra American, hey, I just mentioned you in an exchange there with Grim, in the Twitter exchange you had with him. I quoted you. How's it going, Ultra American? Sadwing says, by the time Labour gets done in the UK, there will be a lot of people who thought they hated Thatcher that will beg for her to come back. Yeah, the problem is that there's nobody left in the Conservative Party who's like Thatcher. In fact, like as horrible as it is that that Labour won this massive majority, it was necessary to crush the Conservative Party, and it'll probably still be necessary in the next term. I think that Labour's probably going to win 2 terms of, I agree, probably totally screwing up the entire country, because it's going to, the second election is going to be even more strongly heated between Reform and the Tories, and hopefully the Tories will get wiped out even worse, and Reform will get more seats and become the official opposition, and then you're going to start getting. That's when you're going to start getting change, because the Tories are unsalvageable at this point. Nothing can. They cannot be. They can't be reformed. Unfortunately, they just can't. Sir the Unicorn says, I'd like to be in VentureCon, but I'm half a country away. Can't take that trip. Ray Calamay says, corporations and fascism are not countries, but companies, but a system of regulatory control over labor, other resources, be it money, powers. Well, yes, except that there's a financial corporation can still be a corporation under fascism, right? Like that's part of the danger of the military-industrial complex, right? That is fascism. It's still the same. There are other ways you could have corporations. You're right. But as it happens, the development of the corporate system in the Western countries has been such that surprisingly it can be the same. It's the same deal, right? Corporations have power that they shouldn't have. Eric G, $2. How and when do you think postmodernism will die? Well, that is very hard to say. I can tell you that it is still up in the air whether postmodernism will die or Western civilization will die. But one of the two has to go. They can't both exist at the same time. It's my hope that the error of it ends up being evident, and that the damage, and that happens before the damage caused by it is so great that there's no surviving it for civilization. My name had to get to bed. Sorry, my name. We'll see you next time. But thanks for being here. And you know that this is a fact, by the way, of the corporate system, because even in Italy and Germany, you had the industrialists were backing the fascists, right? And those guys were a lot less like an Italian fascist corporation was meant to be than what we see today. Like any corporation today is way closer to it. Snake Oil Sean, $5 super chat. Thank you. Pundit, is there a tradition of fairy folk and related superstition in Polish? Well, there's a wide variety of creatures that would be considered fairies in Polish folklore, like tons of it. Now, some of them, what you don't really have is like elves, like the pointy-eared elves, like the Tolkien type elves or something like that. But what you have is a wide variety of creatures that are nature spirits of some kind, right? Nature people. And also household people, right? You have like these little household spirits. There's a household spirit for the threshing floor, a household spirit of the stable, a household spirit of the kitchen, and all of them act kind of like what you'd imagine like little people type fairies are like, right? and they need to be placated with things like milk or bread, right? And then you also have fairies that look like half animal-like creatures or like half tree-like creatures. And then you have fairies that look like incredibly beautiful humans, right? Like female humans that look stunningly pretty, or things like that, right? Or male humans that look very pretty. So there's a huge variety of what you could call fairy lore in the Slavic context, in the Polish context. Yes. What there isn't is like, the Celia and the Uncelia or the Tuatha De Danann or things like that, right? Like the things that inspired the Tolkienish elves, and to a lesser extent, stuff like the Scandinavian elves. $10 from James K. Thank you. Hello, friend. Well met. Something overlooked for fighting men in TTRPGs because it's not sexy. Forced march, encampment skills, sleeping in the heat and cold, pooping in strange places while armed. Yeah, those things are usually overlooked. I'm not sure how much we want to have pooping mechanics in our OSR games, but I will tell you that in my like in Sword and Caravan, for example, because a lot of it is that you're traveling through the Silk Road. There are rules for things like extreme heat and extreme cold. So there is there is some of that stuff. It depends on how much you want to apply it. But yes, you're right. Those are things that if you want to get really gritty, you could add those into your game. Let me see what else we got here. Ultra American says, I'm doing well. Just ran a game earlier to get my mind off all the craziness for a bit. There's a reason I call myself the Ultra American gamer. The Ultra American TTRPGer, I mean. Yeah, well done. That's good. Diversity and Drag says the Italian Social Republic was to be a full-on communist state, but it wasn't. It never that never manifested, and it wouldn't have manifested because the secret is communism is like the least effective of these systems, right? Because it always ends up having the least effective people managing it. And so if you can, instead of having communism, have a system where you have a deal that gets made between certain industrialists, mainly, right, is what you could call them, or business people and politicians and bureaucrats, which is basically like a protection racket, right? They're giving these people a de facto monopoly. They're giving them a free pass on a whole bunch of misbehavior, etc., in exchange for these people propping up what would otherwise be an incompetent state, and that's why that kind of system actually usually works better than going like full communism, ending private property, and handing over control to a bunch of socialist trained bureaucrats, right? That's how you get Venezuela, Okay, somebody talking about Christy Aphrodite. All right. Harrison guys says Italian Social Republic was the rump state. Mussolini went back to his communist roots after rescue. Yeah, but that lasted how long? Like nothing, right? Like it still doesn't negate what the nature of fascism is supposed to be as opposed to communism. Okay, so what are we at now? I don't know how long we've been at this. Let's see, I started at 10. So we've done this for more than 3 hours now. I was going to talk a bit more about my campaigns and stuff, but I think this went longer than I expected. But it was very productive, you know. And I think that everybody here, I mean, given that there's still 81 people watching now, and our peak was, I don't know, what was 110, something like that. That's still pretty good, and I appreciate everybody who's been on here and contributing in the chat and with super chats and everything else. I'm really grateful for all of you guys. Basically, you know, this is Grim Jim's jump the shark moment as far as I'm concerned, and that's why I had to unload on him today. And I said nothing that was not truth, yeah. But he's not going to be. I'm guessing he's not going to be happy about it, because the one thing that his ego demands is that he imagined that he is the great rationalist, when in fact he's the very opposite of that. So there you are. Everybody do hit like on your way out, just like Diversity and Dragon says. Thank you for coming, Double D. Again, check out all of my products. The links are in the description below. Check out my other videos if you haven't seen me before. Share anywhere that you want to share, anywhere you think people will find it interesting or get pissed off about it. And yeah, check out all my stuff, especially if you haven't already. Baptism of Fire, one of the best-selling games of the year so far. And also check out the Pundit Files in the Red Room store. And yeah, thank you very much, guys. We will see you soon. Currently smoking. Still, this is a Ben Wade Rhodesian plus Argento Latakia. And now I've got to figure out how to turn this off. I think it's up here. Yes. See you later, guys.